All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of VR Download. Ian is not here with me today as it is Thanksgiving, and he is obviously an American who celebrates Thanksgiving. I am not, so I'm still manning the station here. To anyone who is an American watching, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great weekend as well. We are going live here to talk about some AI stories at the end. We'll talk about some Black Friday deals near the start, and then we have some very interesting technical stories in the meantime, including a detail of Pico's next headset, some of the key specs for the headset that they are planning to launch in 2026. As part of our kind of AI for 3D layout and reconstruction section at the end of the show, we will be talking about Meta Horizon Hyperscape and specifically the social and sharing update. We covered it as news last week. Just as this show has gone live, we have published now an article of our impressions. And as I'll talk about later in the show, that involved me visiting Kyle's home, Kyle being Kyle Riesenbeck of UploadVR, our operations manager. And that was a really strange, in a good way, experience that we had. Kyle was welcoming me into his home and guiding me around, despite the fact that I'm on a different continent and appearing there in his home as a meta avatar. So, very strange one there. And please go read the impressions, and we'll obviously talk about it later in this show. So, thank you to everyone who is joining here today. We have good amount of viewers coming in. I see a lot of regulars here. Andrew Tech, Hussein, Metal Deathhead, Liberty Sounds, Cognos Square, Pixel Rig, Barbabonk, Barabonk, sorry, YouTube's changed to these tags that are harder to see. Jadranko, VR Catalans, Canarico, Davin Bigelow, Wimpar, Steve 153. Great to see everyone here. And I see some people to start as well. Hero Mission and YPAR, as well as Fmeister 94. So thank you to all of our Upload VR members, both on the website and on YouTube, for your contribution. You really help us do what we do and to expand and try to keep on top of this fast moving industry. And in particular, a very special thank you to our patrons, who, if you aren't aware, it's a higher level of membership. You will be listed on our website's About page, and we read you out at the start of this show, as I'm about to do now. So thank you to XR Developer News, Podum of Smash Drums, HoloNet, Justin Corcon of Phosphor Studios, Richard Meller, Parmesan, Nick Levac, Qubits, Steve Lucas, David Wyatt, Depanch, Soul Presence of Soul Retreat, and Wim Regart. Thanks so much, everyone, for your contribution, and thank you to everyone for being here and watching this show. It is really great to come on the show every week and talk about all of the amazing things that are happening. And I think there are some topics I'm really excited to get into today. But we're going to start off by just kind of recapping the Black Friday deals. We talked about them last week, so I'm not going to go into much detail, and we're not going to get kind of esoteric and philosophical about them. We're just going to make sure that everyone is aware that now is a very good time if you want to bring a friend or a family member, any kind of loved one, into VR and mixed reality, because there are some really, really good deals on that for both Quest 3S and for PlayStation VR 2. We're currently seeing, they're effectively their lowest prices ever. And so that's something I think people should really jump on. If you are also watching this show and you haven't jumped in, right, we are aware sometimes that there are people watching this that haven't jumped in yet. They're just interested in it. From a price perspective, now would be a really, really good time. So we'll start just by talking about the Costco deal. Again, we talked about it last week. It's been one of our highest traffic articles in a while because people are so interested in this. The news here is that still at this moment, until December 2nd, Quest 3S is available for $200 at Costco if you're a Costco member, or $215 if you are not a Costco member. And so this deal went out of stock really quickly. Now it's back in stock, but back ordered. So it's listed as you can buy it, but they're not going to ship it immediately. It's going to take a few weeks. The shipping dates I saw just before I came on the show indicate that it still would get there for Christmas. So it's going to be there on time for Christmas, most likely, but it's not going to ship immediately. That shows you the kind of demand that this deal is pulling in. So if you're a Costco member, this is a full $100 less than the normal price. And I haven't even gotten to the perk yet, which is that in this Costco deal, whether you're a Costco member or not, at $200 or $215, it includes 12 months of Horizon Plus. And that is, if you're unaware, Meta's kind of game subscription, kind of like Xbox Game Pass. It used to be called Quest Plus. It's not anything to do with Horizon Worlds, to be clear. It's we're talking about proper VR games on the store. And Quest Plus, normally you get 3 months of it with any new Quest headset purchase. This deal from Costco, as well as the price being the lowest we've ever seen for Quest 3S, is giving you an extra 9 months, so 12 months in total. And the games library on this that you get access to while you're subscribed includes some of the top titles in VR: Asgard's Wrath 2, Cubism, Demeo, Dungeons of Eternity, 11 Table Tennis, Ghosts of Tabor, Job Simulator, Maestro, Onward, Pistol Whip, Red Matter, Synth Riders, The Climb 2, Walkabout Mini Golf. If Ian was here, he would be shouting that one out. I could go on. There are lots of great games in this catalog. And additionally, each month, Meta lets you redeem 2 games that Meta pre-selects. So there's 2 pre-selected Meta games per month. This month, one of them is Moss Book 2, which is a fantastic seated VR game. And so when you redeem these, they're in your Horizon Plus catalog until you stop subscribing. In this case, say you never wanted to subscribe again, right? It's normally $8 a month, to be clear. If you would still, even if you have no interest in this, get a year of all of these games available to you for free. As long as you remember once a month to log in, you also get 2 extra games on top of this. So I think this is ridiculous value. The effective value you're getting here is just ridiculous. This is like getting a Quest 3S for almost nothing if you were going to go out and buy some of these games. So if you are in the United States, if you are a Costco member, if you have a family member, a niece, a nephew, a cousin, whatever, or a friend, just a close friend, this is their Christmas present. Go do it. Get them into VR, and you can play multiplayer games. And when you're over in each other's homes physically, you can play co-located mixed reality, the stuff we always rant about on this show. If you're someone who's listened to us talk about this, but you don't have a friend or family member who has a Quest 3 family headset, well, now you can go and try these experiences too. I sound like a salesperson, but honestly, normally I'm actually quite against the Quest 3S, as regular viewers will know. I really think that the pancake lenses in the proper Quest 3 are worth the extra price normally. But at this kind of deal, all of that goes out the window, right? You're talking about $200 with 12 months of Quest Plus versus $500 with 3 months for the proper Quest 3. At that point, look, to be clear, folks, if you are wanting to get into VR and you do have the money for $500 and that's not a problem to you, get the Quest 3. I want to say that again. The pancake lenses in the proper Quest 3 are significantly clearer, sharper, and wider than Quest 3S. But I'm just going to repeat that this value is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely the best deal probably we've ever seen in the history of this industry in terms of what you get for this kind of price. As people are pointing out in the comments, this is cheaper than just the controllers for a Galaxy XR or Apple Vision Pro. Obviously, that's how all of these premium products work in comparison to budget products, but it's still a really stark reminder of the kind of value you're getting here. I'm just going to jump straight into the next deal because we don't want to linger on this too much. Everyone now, I think, understands that this is a deal that exists and is very, very good value. There's another deal that might be even better value, might not, depending on what you're going to do. And this is at Best Buy. So they're selling Quest 3S for $250. So it's slightly more than the base price of the Costco deal. But you're actually, depending on what you want to do with the headset, getting more value for some people, because the Best Buy deal includes a $50 Best Buy gift card. So right there, you could use that to buy, the Elite strap for the headset, which is on sale now for, I think, like 20% off. So normally, if you buy a Quest headset, you're going to want to get the either official Elite strap or one of the many third-party alternatives to act as a kind of counterbalance and make it more comfortable. Well, with this Best Buy deal, that's done, right? You pay $250, you have the $50 for that. Additionally, you get 1 month of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, Xbox Game Pass is available on Quest headsets, so you get to play it cloud streamed on a giant virtual screen. You just pair your gamepad via Bluetooth. That's how it works. Works fairly well in my experience. Your mileage is going to vary, like with all cloud streaming stuff. It also includes The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, which is why this is up here on screen if you're watching. So that's $110 of freebies, value, whatever you want to call it. Again, depending which of these deals will be worth it for you is just going to depend on like how interested are you. Would you have bought The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners anyway? Do you want to try Xbox Game Pass for a month? These are things that are going to be very much so personal. But again, let's move on because we don't want to linger on this. This is just covering that there are some great Black Friday deals out there right now. If you are trying to get someone into VR or jump in yourself. The next one we're going to talk about is the PlayStation VR 2 deal. So PlayStation VR 2, it launched, almost 3 years ago now for $550. Earlier this year, Sony permanently cut it to $400. Well, with this holiday sale, you get it for $300. And whereas the Quest sales we just talked about end on December 2nd, this one ends on, I think, around December 19th or something like that. So it's about a week before Christmas. So you actually do have more time to get this. Maybe you're saving up. Maybe you're very tight on money at the moment. PlayStation VR 2, $300 is the lowest price it's ever been. This is obviously if you have a PlayStation 5 and you want to get into VR. Maybe you don't have a PC, you don't want to build a PC or buy a PC, but you do want to get into VR and you don't want the kind of mobile graphics of Quest. Well, if you're willing to accept the cable, if you're willing to accept some of the kind of display trade-offs and not getting mixed reality, the versions of the game that you see on PlayStation VR 2 are significantly higher fidelity than what you see on Quest. And if you have a PS5 Pro, for many of these titles, it's an even bigger difference, right? PS5 Pro with PSVR 2 can deliver some truly stunning graphics in a plug and play kind of form. We don't, I think, espouse the primary benefits of PlayStation VR 2 enough on this podcast. We don't really linger on the fact that it's important that there is a consoleized high-end VR experience. Something that if you don't, as I always say on this show, a lot of people work difficult jobs, have difficult lives, stressful, a lot of stuff going on. They don't want to get home and mess around with the complexities of PC gaming. And I say this as a PC gamer who's been a PC gamer for a very long time now. I love PC gaming. I'm explaining what some people's position is and why it's completely valid. They get home from their long job. They just want something that they can turn on and it works, right? That's the console gaming experience. They just want it to work, plug and play, no messing around with input profiles or config files or wondering why some drivers crashed and, going in and debugging what's gone wrong with what and which incompatibility with which part. They just want, you plug it in, that the game you're running right now was made for your exact headset, your exact controllers. The developer was using this exact hardware and on the rendering and headset and controller side. That's the kind of advantage here of PlayStation VR 2. So, I'm giving all these systems their fair due, right? Obviously, with Quest, the amazing part is it's fully wireless. You don't need a PlayStation 5. You just put it on and you're in, right? And with PC VR, there's a million amazing advantages of it too, of course. You have your UEVR mods that turn regular flat screen games into VR if you play around with the configs. You get these amazing simulators that aren't available anywhere else. I'm just saying that PlayStation VR 2 is its own place. If you're a PS5 gamer, this is a crazy deal. I think $300 is absolutely worth it for this. And also, of course, it works on PC. So you could use this for, if you're currently a racing sim or flight sim person, or again, we're talking about gifting. You have a niece or a nephew or a cousin or whoever in your life is into these things. This could be a good gift for them. So just before we move off this kind of Black Friday section, I'll look for some comments. I see Andrew Tech saying, I have a Quest 3 and a PC. Is there any reason to buy a PS5 plus PSVR 2? Probably not if you already have a Quest 3 and PC. I don't think that's a kind of strong value proposition here. What you would see if you got this, right, is you would be stunned by the vibrance of the image, how punchy the colors are, how deep the blacks are, especially if you've only ever used an LCD VR headset. I've said this before, there is a lot lost in LCD. When you go to these OLED headsets, there is this holy shit moment. But of course, there's also massive trade-offs there. We have to point out, in particular, when it comes to this regular OLED on glass that PSVR2 uses, and in particular its panel, you have this Mura effect. And if you don't know what that is, it's like a non-uniform fixed pattern noise on the screen, like an inconsistency that looks, some people have compared it to the screen being dirty. I remember a commenter last week maybe was that said that it's kind of like there's a linen texture over the display. So you have a noisy image. It's also soft because it has fewer subpixels per pixel than a full RGB display. This is a pentile display. So Sony, normally that wouldn't inherently be soft. Normally what you would see there is like a very visible screen door effect because there's so much gap between the subpixels because there's fewer of them. But when it comes to Sony, what they've done is they've added a kind of diffusion layer. Samsung did this years ago with the Odyssey Plus, if you ever had that, to kind of soften out the image and blur the subpixels a little bit so that they don't have this gap between them. So you don't get a screen door effect really, but you do get softness. So this is the really crazy thing about PlayStation VR 2 and the situation we're in. You go to LCD headsets like Quest 3 and Quest 2 and Quest 3S, you're going to get this really relatively sharp image that, you know, doesn't have noise over it, but it's going to be dull and washed out and not really have good contrast. That's just the reality of LCD, folks. It is. You go to PlayStation VR 2, you're going to get this really rich and vibrant and deep image, but it's noisy and soft. So people always, I think one of the number one questions we get asked, and I know I'm not saying you're asking this, Andrew Tech, but people in general ask, like, which is the better display experience, Quest 3 or PlayStation VR 2? And the answer is, it depends what you care about. Neither of them are better. If you could merge the advantages into both of them into one headset magically, it would be incredible. But we can't. That's not where we are. There are big trade-offs in both of these display technologies. As we often talk about, the only way to go to one that doesn't have at least visual quality trade-offs, it does have other kind of trade-offs in relation to how you have to design the headset, is micro OLED. And the massive trade-off of micro OLED, of course, is cost. It's ridiculously expensive. But once you talk about these affordable display systems, regular LCD versus OLED, these have massive trade-offs. So I don't know. I feel like, look, I don't know what your financial situation is when it comes to recommending buying anything. It depends, right? To Jeff Bezos, these things are nothing. To someone who's on the minimum wage, these things are, you know, massive investments. It's going to depend on who you are. But if you're a big VR enthusiast and you play a lot of games that take place in darkness and space, and you've noticed on some level that what you're seeing isn't actually black, there can actually be something quite remarkable about a PSVR 2. Whether that's a sound financial decision just for that, I don't know. I wouldn't really say so. But yeah, if you have a PlayStation 5 and you don't have a VR headset, that's a very different kind of question. The other thing is that just a note about this before we move on, PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro are also discounted. So this is obviously $100 off. These are $100 off. So right now you can actually get a PS5 Pro and a PSVR 2 for $900 and something dollars. So I think $950. So less than $1,000 all in for a full, you have everything you need for a high-end consoleized VR experience. Pretty good deal, you know? Pretty good deal. Let's move on because we've just recapped these Black Friday deals. We wanted to make you aware of them. We want to kind of almost say, you know, this is the time to get some people into VR at these kind of prices. This is giftable pricing at this point. But let's talk about our next topic, which is Meta's trade-in program for their smart glasses. So at UploadVR for years, we have been saying that Meta really needs a trade-in program for its headsets. It would be great if when Quest 2 came out, instead of Quest 1 owners feeling like they have been kind of screwed over in a sense because they've bought this first generation device that has been obsoleted essentially within 18 months of release by a newer device that was, you know, twice as fast and $100 less. That was the Quest 1 to Quest 2 jump. We said, you know, Meta should let people trade in their Quest 1 for a Quest 2. We were saying this as far as back then. This is the same case with, you know, Quest 2 to Quest 3, right? There's no reason, in my view, that this shouldn't be a thing. Apple does it. I can go and trade in my old iPhone for a new iPhone. Google does it. I often, if I get a new Pixel phone, I trade in my old Pixel phone, and Google gives me a great discount. on the new Google Pixel from it, right? All of these companies are capable of doing it. I don't see why Meta shouldn't. I think it would be great to bring along the users that you already have in your ecosystem and say, hey, here's a really, big incentive. Because not only are you talking about them, getting a better headset, which means they're going to want to spend more time in VR and more money on the store, right? That's Meta's perspective of the advantage there. It also means that they might upgrade to bigger storage, right? Maybe they got 128 gig Quest 2 and it's so full all the time, but they don't want to spend the full money for a new headset, right? They don't want to just go to Quest 3S because it's the same display. Maybe they say, I want to go for the Quest 3. I don't want to pay the full $500. I maybe want to, and Quest 3 would obviously have 4 times the storage. And what do they do with all that storage? They buy more games and they fill it up. So I think Meta should do this. But that said, that's not what Meta has done here. What they have done instead is introduce the trade-in program for their smart glasses. And of course, this is coming after very few smart glasses products from Meta. So the way that they've set this up here is actually very interesting. It's you don't just trade in smart glasses, the Ray-Ban Meta Gen 1 for the Gen 2, for example, and get some discount. They actually also allow you to trade in recent models of Apple AirPods, Beats, and Samsung Galaxy Buds. So this is a really interesting trade-in program. The idea here is, yes, if you have a Gen 1 Ray-Ban Meta glasses, you can upgrade to the Gen 2, which is, got like a better camera and twice the battery life. So I think you get up to $113 if you trade in your Gen 1 Ray-Ban Metas. Okay, so up to, that depends on your exact model. That's the kind of, credit you're going to get here. But if you decide to trade in your AirPods, it supports, AirPods Pro 2, AirPods 4, and AirPods 3, or some of these Beats and Samsung Galaxy Buds, you get around $70 up to, depending on your model, of trade-in value. So this is an interesting proposition here where I often say that, especially when it comes to these displayless smart glasses, my primary use of them is for audio. The camera doesn't even need to be there for most of my usage. I'm using these things personally for all of my phone calls. I think it's amazing to be able to have your ears free, hear your own voice out loud. The fact that they have the 5 microphone array that can really, really capture your voice in a great way. People on the other end of the phone always tell me, "Wow, your mic sounds great. Are you on a desktop system?" I'm saying no. I'm wearing glasses. And then I use them for walking around the park, listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, even just if I'm doing chores in the house, right? I'll have the audiobooks and podcasts up on my glasses. So Meta is obviously really leaning into this and saying, look, if you currently use these earbuds from these companies and you want to get glasses and you think, well, I'm not going to use the earbuds anyway, you get some credit. Interesting idea. I don't think they're full replacements though. I obviously don't, because these are actually amazing for spoken word. The quality of podcasts and audiobooks on these things, 0 complaints. For music, no. I don't want to listen to music on these things. Absolutely not. These are, open air speakers that are simply not going to compete with your AirPods for music. So if I'm listening to music, I still put in my Pixel Buds, right? By now I'm in the Google ecosystem. So I think it's an interesting proposition for Meta, but I'm not so sure that it's actually the best idea, to be honest. I think they would, I really, personally, on a personal level, I hope that they do this for the headsets. I think that would be much more impactful. Let's see if there are any comments here. Chris Richardson asking, what about the Ray-Ban Stories? Can I trade that in? No, you cannot. To be clear, when I'm talking about the Gen 1 Ray-Ban Meta, I'm talking about the one they launched in 2023. So that's, unfortunately, that is what it is. They will not let you trade in those old ones because they don't have any kind of modern value, I guess. They don't have Meta AI or anything like that, and they don't have the camera is nowhere near as good. The Ray-Ban Stories, if you're not aware, was kind of like it was the Gen 1 of this. Now it's kind of Gen 0 in the current terminology. Which came a few years earlier, completely flopped, and made a lot of people think that the displayless smart glasses idea was a flawed. Turned out, as is a trend on this show, it just needed the right technology and features to be good enough there. I think we should also note that the Gen 1 Ray-Ban Metas have their own Black Friday sale at the moment. You can get them for $213. And so those are the ones, again, that launched in 2023. All the same features as the newer ones, the Gen 2, but they do not have the same camera or battery life. So also a good giftable gift, I guess. If someone in your life would enjoy that, go for it, I guess. But I think you should get them a VR headset instead. One thing we should note about the trade-in program, just before we move on, is that it does not apply to the Meta Ray-Ban display. You cannot get a discount. You're going to have to pay $800. There's no way out of that. This is only applies to their displayless glasses. So, for example, you could trade in your AirPods for a Oakley Meta Vanguard or something like that. It's just an example. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is about the Godot engine, which is, if you're unaware, the free and open source alternative to Unity and Unreal Engine. Technically, it's controlled by the non-profit Godot Foundation, but all of its development takes place in the open. You know, you can track the GitHub PRs and everything. It is an open source project. For around a year and a half now, Meta has been funding a group of Godot veterans to improve the engine's XR support, including OpenXR, Quest-specific features, everything, the documentation, the tutorials, the samples. Meta very much so wants there to be clearly a third option to Unity on Unreal that is valid for native apps, not talking about like Horizon Worlds. From Meta's perspective, I assume it's one of the things where if there are more engines, each specific engine has less leverage, right? They can't try to control Meta in a sense. This is from their kind of corporate strategy perspective. They're also, you know, it means that if they're able to get Godot to do some feature, well, then the other engines are going to feel pressured and things like that. The advantage for everyone in the world is that you get this open source engine that has now today got great support for XR. It was really rudimentary a year and a half ago, and now it's really great. And so the news here is that there are even more features have arrived and are arriving soon that are relevant to XR. I should also note, if you aren't aware, Godot, unlike Unity and Unreal, is available on Quest. And by that, I don't mean you can just compile games that run on Quest. I mean the editor itself runs on Quest standalone. So you can actually get the Godot engine and use it as a 2D window in Horizon OS with your keyboard and mouse connected and compile Quest apps on Quest, compile the APKs on the Quest without a PC. Remarkable stuff. Kind of came and went as not much news. There are good reasons for that, I guess. You know, you need more compute and more resolution and comfort for this to really be an impactful thing, but it's still remarkable that it's technologically there. Not for Quest 2, though. It's Pro and 3 and 3S only because of the RAM needed for this. But that brings us on to the current news for Godot. So first, we'll just cover that in September, they released 4.5, which brought a number of important features for XR. You can now use DirectX 12 and OpenXR together on Windows for improved performance for PC VR apps. Foveated rendering now works in Vulkan on Android. Previously, it only worked in Vulkan on desktop or OpenGL on Android, and you absolutely want to use Vulkan on Android for VR. You really want to get that for maximum performance. If you're not kind of familiar with what we're talking about here, DirectX 12 and Vulkan are like these modern graphics APIs that let developers go much lower level, or I should say these engines go much lower level and squeeze out better performance. The argument that some developers will make, if you're writing something yourself, that it gives you the potential to write better performance. It also gives you the potential to have worse performance. But in the cases of these graphics engines that are designed by graphics experts, it's going to be better performance. The other thing is application space warp is now supported on Quest and Pico. That's the developer side SDK feature that lets games render at half frame rate, and then the system synthetically generates every second frame using positional reprojection algorithms and motion extrapolation. So that's supported in Godot now. They have also implemented support for OpenXR render models. And so that refers to, so traditionally when you built a VR game, you would actually have to either include, say, virtual hands if you're going to do like a character that has hands, but many games and gaming apps will show you your controllers, right? You're familiar with this. If you're in VR, you look down in a game or an app and see a virtual version of your controllers. So traditionally, what VR developers have had to do then, if they want to do this, is include a 3D model of every possible controller they want to support. And that meant that if you then ran that game on a future headset that has controllers that didn't exist when the developer made the last version of this app you're using, you're going to see old controllers. How many times have you seen this? You go into an old game and you see the Quest 1 controllers or something like that, or Quest 2 is probably more common when it hasn't been updated. That's a huge issue. And it's also, effort for developers that shouldn't have to happen. So the OpenXR render models extension is part of the OpenXR spec, and it lets apps dynamically load in 3D models of the active track controllers. So the OS, right, Horizon OS or Android XR or Steam VR or whatever, has these controller models in it for the headset itself, right? So Steam Frame will have controller models for its controllers. Horizon OS will have the Touch Plus controllers, and then the OS sends the app these 3D models so it can dynamically load them in and then render them in game. So that's what Godot now supports. This means, you don't if you don't want to implement hands, if you just want to build a non-game app, this is really, really important, right? You want to represent the controllers virtually, but you don't want to have a 3D model for every possible controller. That's a nightmare for developers. So this is a great feature. And as I mentioned before, it means future support, right? Someone that builds an app today, someone comes out with a crazy controller in 2 years' time, well, it's kind of supported by default. Now, there are obviously complexities around there, right, about how the specifics of how these things are done. But in general, this is a great feature to have, and developers can work with it in a pretty good way. I haven't really got to what I think is the most important feature of Godot 4.5, which is that it delivers full support for building a universal OpenXR APK Android app that can, in theory, run on any Android-based standalone headset that supports OpenXR. So that's the spirit of OpenXR in general, right? That's always what was supposed to happen from day one. The idea that if you have this OpenXR APK, it doesn't matter which headset you run it on, Pico, Quest, Android XR, Play for Dream, whatever, it should just run because it's OpenXR. That's the whole idea, right? Like, you don't have to make different APKs for Samsung phones and Pixel phones, or different like versions of Windows or whatever. These applications should just run. So there are technical complexities that meant that wasn't the case until now for Godot, and now it is. Even, there's still reasons that you need to build a separate APK for different platforms, but it's now not strictly necessary. And Godot talks about this being like the core promise of OpenXR, and that they're very, very happy to be able to deliver on this in the engine. Previously, if you're using this engine, it really did mean, building one for Android XR, one for Pico, and one for Quest, etc. So that's 4.5. 4.6 is now in public testing, and it's set to bring even more XR features, including OpenXR 1.1 with all the benefits that brings. One of those benefits is support for the OpenXR spatial entities extensions. They were released earlier this year. We covered it in the podcast and the website. That standardizes how developers leverage the physical environment around you. So that includes persistent spatial anchors, plane tracking, marker tracking, like QR code tracking. All of that is now kind of in an OpenXR core extension for people to use. So all of this stuff you can now build for multiple platforms, right? You can have a persistent anchor. So you build a game that you can pack do every day in mixed reality, and it has, something on your wall in the same place that it was last time, or you want to, track a table and put a virtual board game onto that table. All of these things are, again, becoming part of the OpenXR spec that developers don't have to use headset-specific SDKs for. So great stuff. Here's this, the spatial entities extension. You see here, for example, some kind of images of depicting that. I'll have a look at the comments now before we move on to our next topic. See some people kind of having conversations about the Pico headset. We're going to get into that very, very soon. Dutch Tiger saying Godot will be available on the Steam Frame too. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess you could use both versions or either, right? You could use the desktop version, the Linux version, or you could use the Android version. So that's something that's obviously very cool there. But it's on Steam Frame, that's going to be somewhat the norm because it's a desktop architecture. It's more remarkable on Quest because it's an Android kind of mobile architecture. So yeah, I see Davin Bigelow saying that they're so glad to see Godot engine growing. Meta helped fund uh, their XR staff. Yep, that's absolutely the case. It is great to see a free and open source alternative to uh, these kind of big companies, Unity on Unreal, Unity on Epic, I guess, emerging. So that's good to see. Let's move on to talk about our next topic, which is Horizon OS V83. So it is now rolling out, and it brings two really interesting experimental features that are kind of core tech stuff that if you're a kind of VR tech enthusiast, you're going to really find interesting. And even if you're not, you're going to find potentially useful, and you'll find it actually improves your experience. Even if you are, an I just care about the games kind of person, you're going to find that if you enable these, they might really improve some aspects of your kind of gaming experience. So these two features are system positional time warp and temporal dimming. Let's actually talk about the temporal dimming one first. So there's kind of some confusion here because there is another similar experimental feature that Meta rolled out quite a while ago now called content adaptive brightness control. So we'll start by contextualizing with it. You can see here a screenshot of a scroll down view of the experimental settings in Quest here. Content adaptive brightness control, which was added months and months ago, is basically dynamic dimming. So by that, I mean dimming of the LCD backlight. Remember, as we always discuss on this show, OLED displays are self-emissive, meaning that every pixel provides color and light. Every single pixel of an OLED display, like on Apple Vision Pro or PlayStation VR 2. That's self-emissive. On LCD, each pixel provides color, but a global backlight, this layer behind it, a big light to greatly oversimplify things, provides the lighting. And so you have this kind of global light level, this global bright light. You turn the brightness up and down on LCD, and it affects everything, the entire display. So the brights get brighter, but the darks get brighter as well, for example, throughout the display. And it's the biggest trade-off of LCD. It's the fundamental trade-off of LCD. So there are some interesting mitigations you can do on a software level here, and TVs have been doing this for many, many years. This dynamic dimming is one of them. So say you go into a scene that is literally completely black, right? You've gone into a VR game. The developer is just giving you a black loading screen. Not a great experience, but it happens. With this feature enabled, the Quest system will automatically bring down the backlight brightness to very low levels. So you kind of get a simulated OLED black. Not really, because it's still not going to turn the backlight all the way off in my experience. You could do that, but I don't think they do. In reality, of course, you're not often just looking at complete blackness. You're looking at something that has a little bit of black, a little bit of light parts, and that's why OLED's so amazing. But what this feature will then do is kind of bring up the brightness and bring it down relative to the darkness of the image on screen. Again, it's something TVs have been doing for a while. So in theory, great, right? You're doing this kind of dynamic dimming. You can kind of keep it a little bit dynamic, right? Get dark scenes. If you're in a really, really dark scene, you bring the brightness way down. Theoretically, you could have been doing this the whole time manually, right? You could be going in and changing your brightness down whenever you're in a really dark room in a VR game. And then once you go outside into the brightness, you raise it all the way up. This is doing that automatically. That's all it is. It's nothing fancier than what you would be doing if you were doing this manually in a very silly scenario with your VR controller in the settings of the brightness. Of course, the problem with this, and again, we're still talking about the feature that launched months and months ago as an experiment here, an optional experiment, CABC. The problem is that it's very noticeable. So you can actually kind of be in a scene where there's darkness over here and brightness over here, and turn your head here and you can see the brightness of the display go down, and turn your head over here and you see the brightness of the display go up. And even, in very small pans, you can watch as the display gets brighter and darker, and that it doesn't feel right. It reminds you that you're looking at a display. The world doesn't feel solid and kind of a brightness level. We all know what geometric instability looks like, but this is brightness instability. I don't really like it. It was great in theory. As you can see in my screenshot, I keep it off. So that's what makes this new temporal dimming feature very, very interesting, because you can see here it says with minimal impact on user experience, but it's still talking about dynamically adjusting the screen brightness. It's only saying during idle periods. I turned this on. I didn't see anything noticeable, which is a good thing, right? I didn't see the display brightness turning up and down, but it did seem that the kind of blacks got a little bit blacker. Still not OLED level, but it seems like what they're doing here is doing some sort of like accumulated brightness change, so it's more like an average thing or something like that. In their description, in their settings, they just talk about it gradually dimming your display brightness, extending battery life and improving display performance, all generic stuff. From my testing, I didn't notice anything bad, which is a good thing, right? So I think this is a lot more likely to become either on by default or at least out of experimental than CABC. CABC, I just think my experience of it doesn't work for VR. It's a good idea in theory, just does not work for VR in practice. It's far too noticeable. Again, I'm just going to say it again. Panning your head and watching the display brightness go up and down, not great. But yeah, so temporal dimming, that's what this is. It seems to be like a better implementation of CABC that isn't just like per frame. It seems to do kind of more time accumulated. Yeah. So that's that one. Let's go on to talk about positional time warp, which is arguably a lot more interesting. So in every XR operating system, every frame that an app renders gets reprojected before it reaches your eyes, before it gets displayed on the screen. So the app finishes rendering the frame. That's not what gets sent to your eye, to your display, to your headset. Instead, the compositor, the kind of graphics part of the operating system, will rotationally reproject it. Why? Because in the time since the frame started to render, right, where at the start of the frame, when it starts to render on the GPU, it has to pick a position of where you're rendering it from, right, a perspective. So what does it use? Of course, it uses your headset's position. Your positional tracking system from your headset tells it, here is the coordinate within the virtual world and the angle where your head was looking, the position and orientation to render the frame from, right? So far, all makes total sense. But since that time and the current time when the frame is being displayed, right, which could be, depending on it's going to depend on your frame rate, how much that is, and your refresh rate. It could be 15 milliseconds or something like that, roughly. Let's just say for the sake of discussion. In that 15 milliseconds, your head will have slightly moved, right? So maybe you've turned a little bit to the left, ever so slightly. Now we're talking about very minute movements here because this is only 15 milliseconds, but it is a movement. And so if you were just to display that frame to your eyes, you actually would see a little bit of latency there. And this is what the very first kind of modern VR headsets would do. You would literally just show what was rendered. And I tried them, and you could actually see latency. So you move your head around like this, and it would feel like there was just a tiny bit of delay, right? In a modern headset, if everything's working, you shouldn't feel any of that delay because they all do this position or this rotational reprojection. But it's only rotational in most systems most of the time. It's not going to change if your head moved like this positionally. It's only going to affect if your head rotated. So what do they do? What do they literally do? What does this reprojection mean? It just means that they skew the image towards the angle of where your head moved. So they literally just like warp. They call it time warp, is what John Carmack called it when he implemented it in the Oculus SDK, more than a decade ago now. Warping, skewing, whatever you want to call it. It's a reprojection from the angle that it was rendered to the angle of where your head has moved to since then. Easy to understand. And it's important to just remember, this is done for every frame all the time to reduce latency. Now, the other thing it's done for is if an app doesn't finish rendering at all in that 15 milliseconds or however long it is for your current refresh rate, instead of just displaying the old frame, right, because you don't have a new frame, the app didn't render in time, you need to turn down the graphic settings or whatever. What it does is it skews again, warps again that old frame and then shows you it. So, the first frame that was real and rendered on time gets skewed a little bit. Then the next one gets skewed even further. And so this is why sometimes if you're really absolutely missing frame rate and your app is really low, you see these black bars around the kind of edge of the display in the opposite direction of where you were looking, because they've now kind of skewed so much from the original frame position that there's not enough on the edges to have anything displayed kind of there, right? They've gone so far of the original that you don't see it. That's why you see those black bars occasionally in VR. Anyway, all of this is context just to say that it was rotation only. And what Meta says they've introduced in this update is positional time warp. So everything I just said now applies positionally as well, in 6 DoF, not just 3 DoF. So that should mean that positional latency feels lower, right? So always already it should feel very, very low latency for you to turn your head like this in any of these, up, down, left, right, sideways like this, yaw. But with this update, if you have this enabled as an experimental feature, the latency for moving your head positionally should feel even lower. Now, it already is very low in these modern VR systems, right? But this should feel even lower. And again, what did I just explain? That the other way this is used, not just for latency, is for when an app drops a frame. So if you didn't have this frame drop compensation, a synchronous time warp, what you would see if the app dropped a frame is this kind of rotational judder, and it's horrible. You have not, if you never used a headset like 10 years ago, if you've only used like modern systems, you'll never even have experienced it unless something went very wrong with the compositor. But an actual rotational judder, it feels viscerally bad. It really does. You just it's one of those things that's there and it's so essential and such a core part of your current VR experience these days that you don't even know what you're missing in terms of how bad it can be. Awful. But you do still experience positional judder, right? When an app drops frames, you get the position judder because you're getting the position, the perspective positionally in 6 DoF space from the last real frame that was rendered. Well, now with this positional time warp enabled, as it explains here in the setting, you should not see the same judder from frame drops. Now, obviously, these are synthetic frames. They are using, the motion vectors and the depth buffer to kind of reproject through space through this kind of not reorientation, that's the wrong word. The kind of reprojection is the correct word to just keep using in 6 DoF space. And over time, the more and more frames that you're dropping, the more wrong this will get, because it is, again, a synthetic frame. It's not a real frame, it's synthetic. So it's kind of similar to application space warp. With that, you're doing this intentionally all the time. And positional time warp has actually been a part of the Quest OS for 4 years now. For application space warp, that's actually what this technology was first implemented on Quest for. So if you'd use an app space warp game, that might render at 36 frames and double to 72 or 45 to 90, you're already using this technique for these synthetic frames. What this is doing, this update, this experimental feature, is bringing that system-wide to every app that doesn't use app space warp. So you're getting the same technology, but it's used for every frame and to produce not just rotationally synthetic frames when you drop a frame in an app, but positionally synthetic frames as well. And so this is the setting here. Now, Geek Odin says most games don't submit depth buffers, and that's very true. But in my testing of this, that didn't seem to matter. And there's a note in their changelog here that talks about depth from stereo. And I think what they're doing here seems to be that they're actually inferring depth in the same way they do for mixed reality, for pass-through, to do like occlusion and stuff, where they're taking the frame and then running a depth from stereo algorithm, which have gotten very efficient these days, coming up with a depth buffer from just looking at the actual color frames and then doing it synthetically. Need to dig into that a bit more. But again, I keep saying I did try this with games that I'm aware don't submit depth buffers, ones that are older than even I think let you submit depth buffers. And I did notice, I was able to turn this off and on and did see this kind of difference in positional judder. So that's going to be fascinating to see. We need to dig into this more, right? This update, it only has just started to roll out. I only got it in my headset earlier today. I need to dig into it more. But yeah, as Biggs and Davin Bigelow are both saying, I think, or I think it's Spatial Big saying, at this point, modern kind of computer vision algorithms are good enough that you don't necessarily need a depth buffer to do this. My understanding is that they do leverage it if you do, because that's for app space warp, you have to have a depth buffer. So positional time warp clearly is capable of taking it in. But I think it seems clear here that they have come up with an algorithm that doesn't actually need it, which we'll talk later in the show about how, um, you know, advances in AI and computer vision are really supercharging VR in many ways. And this is, I guess, a very small way. I doubt this is like a full neural algorithm or anything like that. It's probably just a very efficient computer vision algorithm, but it's still a good example. Okay. I see some people saying, when am I going to get this feature? Meta rolls out these updates, so you'll need to just wait until your headset gets it. It could be tomorrow, it could be already, it could be next week or the week after. Unfortunately, that's how this works. So Anakazi is saying, I thought that was the original difference between time warp and space warp. So what's confusing here is that what was implemented on Rift has similar naming, but different implementation to what was implemented on Quest. So on PC, they used space warp to refer to what a system that's similar to what Valve has, where it kicks in automatically if you're not making frame rate. So space warp, we're not talking about this positional time warp. We're talking about the space warp that Quest apps can use to render at half frame rate and have it doubled. On Quest, it's a developer feature. So a game that you play has it on or doesn't. The developer chose. On PC, it's not. The system will just enable it when you're not making frame rate. So, you're chugging along at 50 frames per second. The Steam VR or Oculus Link will say, no, you're going to render at 45 and I'll double it for you to 90, for example. And, Godot has a similar implementation in virtual desktop that I think he gives you the option, right, automatically and always on. So Godot gives you the choice, whereas Quest lets the developer choose, and PC, you either have off or auto on. Yeah, so I see Free Sopa saying, or maybe they send a depth buffer on the driver level. Yeah, I think it's possible that they would do stuff like that. You could break some games, though, with that. So maybe that's why this is an experimental feature. Yeah, I guess, look, we're talking about Meta owns the stack here, right? They don't make the chip and they don't make the core of Android, but they can change whatever they want in Android. It's an open source OS, and they have a very, very close relationship with Qualcomm. So it's not out of the question that they are doing some GPU driver stuff on the Adreno, right? That we know for a fact that Qualcomm and Meta do implement custom GPU driver stuff for Quest headsets. That is factually something that happens. So it could be possible. As I said, I'd love to dig into this further. So that's Quest V83. I see LL asking, does this increase performance or in perceived performance notably? So it will make the effect of per performance feel less bad. You will see less judder when the app is not making frames. It's not magic bullet, right? You're going to still see a little bit of judder, but it's going to be more like artifacts, imperfections. You will see, instead of getting judder, you will trade off judder for artifacts. And I would take that trade any day. Judder feels horrible in VR. It really does. It's cancer for VR. It really does suck to feel judder. It makes you physically sick. Even people who are fine with thumbstick locomotion, for what it's worth, many of those people will feel sick from judder. Now, there are some people who can chug along at 20 frames per second in VR and feel nothing. Of course, they exist, but there are actually this big category of people who are completely fine at making frame rate and pushing around a thumbstick and flying all around the world. But as soon as you start to add like judder, that will make them sick. It's on a much more visceral level. Okay, let's talk about our next topic here. I think we've had an interesting discussion here. Yeah, I see Spatial Big saying even one hard frame drop can slam you hard. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, genuinely. Frame drops are terrible. Like, performance matters so much more in VR than on a flat screen. We say this often on the show, and it really is important. On a flat screen, your app is running at low frames, right? You're playing a PlayStation game, and the developer, for whatever reason, has it running at low frame rate, and they haven't optimized or whatever, or they just didn't have time. They had to ship the game out, and you get into an intense fight scene, and it chugs down to 15 frames per second. It's annoying. You're like, oh, this sucks. It feels bad. But it doesn't make your body feel physically sick in most cases. For some people, if you have a giant screen in front of you, it can. It's a separate topic for another day. For VR, it does. It actually makes you feel physically sick. Your brain thinks something is going wrong. Why is my perception system screwed up? Am I being poisoned? Is there something completely wrong with me? Like, what's going on here? I should throw up the poison. That's one of the theories behind it. There are other theories, but I like that theory, so I'm going to point it out. I think it's an interesting theory, right? Your body thinks there's something wrong with my perception system. I need to throw up. Anyway, yeah. I see Davin saying that they never get VR sick, even at 15 frames per second. Well, all power to you, but I guess even you would say that it feels a lot better, right? From a kind of motion aesthetics level, it's going to feel a lot better. One of the things we have in this studio is 120 FPS. If we're going to spend 3 hours here talking to you, we're going to do it at 120. Obviously this is graphically simplistic, but we meet frame rate. We are constantly at 120. I have a little frame counter here. I've been at 120 the whole time. It feels great. I think you would see me getting like more annoyed and angry, and we would have, harder arguments and things if we were like chugging along at low frame rate. It actually kind of does affect personality as well, and how your mood, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It ruins your day, it ruins your mood, ruins your vibe. Whereas 120, I'm feeling great. Okay. So just to recap that, performance in VR is so important that we have to come up with all these crazy techniques for a decade now, some by John Carmack and others, and it really is one of those things where performance and latency matter. And as I pointed out before, on flat screen games, what some of them do is they trade off latency for performance. So for kind of raw throughput, you kind of get more stable, more frames per second in total, but the frames are arriving a lot later. You can't do that in VR. VR is the nightmare scenario for graphics optimization. It has to be low latency and high throughput. There's no cheats, and you're doing, stereo 3D. You're doing 72 at minimum, which for a flat screen game is a high frame rate already, right? A lot of Switch games are running at 30 or whatever, and people say like, "Oh, Witcher 3 can run on a Switch. Why can't it run on a Quest 3?" Well, the Switch is doing it at 720p, 2D, 30 FPS. I think less than 720p actually. And then Quest, you would have to do it at like 2K per eye, 72, 3D. And yeah, sure, you get away with like app space warp and stuff, but it doesn't save 100% performance. It saves around 70, and then you get the kind of artifacts with it. Yeah. So I see Electric Vroom saying 120 FPS in VR is like 60 in flat games. Yeah, that's an interesting take. I think that's quite reasonable to say. Yeah. 120 is, I think, where 90. Look, 90 is great. You're not really going to complain about 90 in VR. 120 is just chef's kiss, but 90 is fine. Let's be honest here. A lot of graphically intensive games on standalone are running at 72, and a lot of Quest games on Quest 2 run at 72. A lot of Quest 3 patches bring it up to 90, but there's more Quest 2s out there than Quest 3s. So most people today are experiencing VR at like 72 frames per second. And a lot of PlayStation VR 2 games run at 60, reprojected to 120. So, we're a long way off from the paradise. We're a long way off, And like I see Chester saying, that's why you need power, and standalone just can't deliver that. Well, look, a lot of PlayStation VR 2 games go for 60 because they're trying to deliver, really, really rich graphics that look great on screenshots and video recordings, and maybe that trades off what it actually looks like in the headset because you lose the motion clarity, for example, because the reprojection on PlayStation VR 2 is just not great. I think a lot of this is a choice. I see Important saying you don't need depth buffers for space warp. You can use motion vectors only. I wasn't aware. I thought it was necessary, but I'm I'm very certain that they use them if you provide them. I know that's for sure. And it provides a much better quality. I'm surprised they let you do it without. Are you sure about that important? I'm pretty sure that it's either. I mean, I know for certain it's either highly, highly recommended or required. It may be the case that it's just highly, highly recommended, but not strictly technically required. Maybe that is the case, but I think you'd be crazy to not provide the depth buffer for Space Warp because you're going to have a lot of artifacts where things are kind of having a depth conflict that shouldn't be there. Um, is the Les is asking, is the gray bar normally along the bottom of the screen, or have I messed something up? So, oh god, I wish we had a different camera perspective to show you here. The gray bar, I guess I can kind of go from here to here, is actually my table. This is a physical object that I have here. Maybe you want to, obviously this is very, very simplistic rendering, so you don't see that. You can kind of see it if I put my hand through it, I guess. That, I can kind of bring the hand over here if I had enough space, and you can see that it's my table. It's just my desk. I've got my little tablet over here. Yeah, so that's funny. Like, point taken, it's probably not great to have it here if we don't have some sort of texture on it, but we'll get to that over Christmas. Hopefully we get a little bit of time to update some things in here. Let's move on to our next topic, and it's the one that I've seen so much discussion about, so let's just get straight into it. Let's get your takes. If you've given a take, I haven't seen it. We do things topic by topic here. It's Pico. So we have some specs for Pico's 2026 headset. If you're not aware of who Pico is, if you're wondering what is this company, it is the VR headset company owned by ByteDance, which is the Chinese tech giant that owns TikTok. So in the same sense that you have, Meta, the Western social media company with MetaQuest and Reality Labs, you have ByteDance, the kind of Chinese social media company with Pico. And so Pico headsets are actually the only existing direct competition with Quest. By direct, I mean they're very similar from a device perspective. They're running like an Android fork. They have track controllers in the box. Specs are very similar. The pricing is roughly similar. They're not sold in the United States for complicated reasons that are likely to do with the TikTok ban. So there's always this kind of looming TikTok ban that's at some stage of political implementation. We're not going to get political here, but we're going to point out that in the US political system, there is obviously demand from some people for a TikTok ban. It was not enacted it was enacted for like 24 hours or something like that. To what degree it goes from, an idea as one side of the spectrum to, TikTok is banned on phones seems to wobble about in this kind of last part here, where it becomes something that is sort of a law that has a deadline to coming in, that gets enacted, that then gets retracted for a while. You can go and read elsewhere about the specific political implications of that. We're not going to get into that. What we are going to point out is that this is one of the reasons that ByteDance likely does not want to launch a consumer product in the United States that has multiple cameras on it that is watching your home. There's obviously going to be, their nightmare scenario is that it tips the scale in one of these TikTok hearings in, the US political system, where, they go, and what about this headset you got on here, this VR headset that's whatever, or some scandal happening, which is even worse, and then they point out, well, if you can't be trusted to not have, this app developer that just used the Pico 4 to watch some kid's room, then how the hell can we trust you with TikTok, right? So that's my understanding of this, is that is the reason that Pico headsets are not sold to consumers. You can buy them as businesses, to be clear. They're not sold to consumers. You can buy them as businesses. Now, that said, you can import one, and I'm sure I always see some people in the comments saying, I imported mine. Good for you, but we always want to point out to people that means that your warranty is invalid. So your controller breaks, you're screwed. Your headset has any kind of issue, you're going to need to buy a whole new one. There's no, Pico is just going to tell you, sorry, you're not an area that we have a legal consumer warranty on. So you're not going to get there. Okay, so Pico 4 was kind of this weird midpoint between the Quest 2 and Quest 3 that came out between Quest 2 and Quest 3, interestingly. So time-wise and specs-wise. Pico 4 was essentially the chip of a Quest 2 with lenses that are kind of closer to Quest 3. It's pancake lenses, not quite as good as Quest 3's, but they're really good pancake lenses, right? They're not they're a lot better than the Fresnel lenses of Quest 2 and 3S, for example, right? I'd say they're solidly in the middle in terms of like sheer quality, but closer to the Quest 3 side. And so again, this is a product that came out for just a little bit more than Quest 2, between Quest 2 and Quest 3. It also had one pass-through camera, just like monocular color pass-through, as well as your standard 4 tracking cameras. And Pico 4 Ultra, which came out last year at the same time as the Quest 3S, is like a Quest 3 with a bit of a spec bump. It's a Quest 3 with more RAM and a active depth sensor. And it has very similar controllers and such, but it's the same display and optics from Pico 4. But again, the Pico 4 display and optics, same resolution as Steam Frame, pancake lenses, good headset, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually it's a good piece of hardware. It's slightly more expensive than Quest 3 though, maybe like close to 100 euros more expensive. So they've kind of gone up market a bit. And the Pico store, a lot of Americans don't realize, actually has a huge percentage of the Quest store games. A lot of the non-exclusives are there. It's not everything, right? You're obviously always going to find something that's not available on Pico, but it's a big chunk. And Pico has been updating their OS over time to kind of, match the kind of multitasking stuff. Their hand tracking has been getting better and better over time. It's still not to the Quest level, but it's a decent product. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine why, if you were just looking to do, out of the box VR gaming, you would choose a Pico headset over a Quest, but you wouldn't get it and be like, this is a piece of shit. You wouldn't be like, oh God, I've got a really bad headset. You're going to have a very similar experience to what you get on a Quest 3 with a Pico 4 Ultra, just with less content on the store, and you're going to be missing certain features. But you're also getting some other features. We often want to point out this on the show. They have the Pico trackers. So you can buy these things, and these days you can now actually strap up to 5 of them on you at the moment. I'm trying to find the screenshots of this. So you have the 2 on your legs by default at your ankles, and they do kind of leg tracking. And then with kind of recent updates that we covered on the show, you can actually add 3 more. So the first one they added was one that you put around your waist. It's sold as, the Pico waist tracker. It's got a longer strap, but you can buy these same leg ones and put them either onto your wrists, or I think the other option is at the top of your legs for better leg tracking. So you can get either, better arm tracking or better leg tracking. And these are, of course, no base stations. They're essentially controllers without the thumbsticks and buttons and triggers, right? They've got IR LEDs on them and IMUs. So I always point out that I love the calibration of them. The calibration step is look down, and once the headset sees them, it's calibrated. That's it, paired and set up and good to go. Really well done on a UX perspective. You can also use these as custom object trackers, right? They have USB-C for power and data. So you can build a custom VR controller if you're, say, a business that's doing like an LBE thing, and just stick one of these little 29-gram things on, and now you have a tracked object and again, the data goes over USB-C. So it goes from here and then Bluetooth to the headset. So you're actually able to send data to the headset wirelessly. Really cool. We often want to just point out that Pico should be commended for doing this. I know a lot of Quest enthusiasts who would, love for Meta to do this, that are deeply, deeply passionate about wanting Meta to do this. And Meta's CTO has been clear that Meta is not going to do this. So that's Pico today. We're kind of pointing out its situation. Where's Pico going next? That's the conversation today. So around over a year ago now, a long time ago now, or actually like a year and a half, there was this report that Pico 5 was cancelled, and instead there would be a Pico 4 refresh, like a Pico 4 upgrade. And this report came from The Information. And that has obviously happened. That was Pico 4 Ultra. They were correct. But there was another part of that report, and it was that instead of a Pico 5, they were going to do an Apple Vision Pro competitor. So instead of just Pico 5, they actually branch off. A short-term refresh, Pico 4 Ultra, a long-term high-end headset, an Apple Vision Pro competitor. Project Swan is what it was referred to in that report. Well, now, this week, we have a Chinese news outlet, Star Market Daily, reporting that a ByteDance executive said at a ByteDance event that Pico's 2026 headset, its next headset coming next year, will have micro OLED panels with 4,000 pixels per inch and a dedicated self-developed chip for pass-through to deliver less than 12 milliseconds of latency end-to-end for the pass-through cameras. So the 4,000 PPI number, that pretty much exactly matches Samsung Galaxy XR, Play for Dream MR, Shift All Mechanics. That means 4K per eye micro OLED. Theoretically, if they had a bigger or smaller screen, it could mean a different resolution. It's unlikely that they do. It's possible, but it's unlikely. So we're expecting 4K per eye micro OLED there. But to be clear, what he said was 4,000 PPI. That's the kind of density we're talking about here. He also said about this pass-through chip. So the only headsets we know of so far that do this, that have a dedicated secondary chip for pass-through, is, of course, Apple's R1 chip on the Apple Vision Pro. So you have the M2 or the M5 plus the R1, with the R1 doing some of the really heavy, high bandwidth processing of the pass-through cameras. A lot of it is actually sheerly about bandwidth, not just specifically like about doing any kind of super fancy computer vision. It also means that an Apple Vision Pro, if one chip kind of is failing to meet performance at one time, you can still deliver pass-through without doing pass-through judder. It's a very, very interesting kind of solution there on Vision Pro that should absolutely be noted. So Pico seems like they want to copy it. There's also thermal advantages. And actually, this is probably one of the biggest, because on Quest, for example, when you enable pass-through, you have to bring down the CPU and GPU level. So mixed reality apps cannot use the GPU and CPU of Quest 3 at the highest level, but VR apps can when pass-through isn't being done. And so, like, when you don't think about this too much, you might think, oh, well, Quest is doing a bunch of processing in the pass-through. But that's not what's happening, because it's not like they're giving less performance to developers. It's not just that. The CPU and GPU are actually being clocked lower. It's about the thermals. It's about the fact that you're bringing in this massive amount of bandwidth in real time and going through the ISP and the DSP and all these parts of the chip that are bringing in these image signals. In the same way that you'll notice, if you go onto your phone and even just bring up the camera app, you can see that, like, if you go into like diagnostic stuff, you can see the temperatures go up as you're pulling all this in real time in a very minor level. And if you use like an ARKit app even on your phone, that'll actually have it'll use more thermals. That your phone will get hotter than when you're just playing a 3D game that doesn't use the camera. So these things are actually meaningful. So Pico looks to be the first non-Apple company that is trying to deliver the same thing. So it looks like what they might be trying to do here is to deliver the best-in-class pass-through quality. Like they may want to say, let's put all our engineering talent to this and deliver the best pass-through, because that's a selling point, right? The high-end market is actually getting a little bit saturated now, isn't it? Right? You have, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but you have Apple Vision Pro, and you have Samsung Galaxy XR, and you have Play for Dream, right? So you have, the Android XR option, you have the Apple ecosystem option, and you have a third one that's just like a Singaporean Chinese company offering an alternative, right? Well, what would Pico be? Yet another headset there? What's their USP? What's their unique selling point? It looks like from this report, it may be that they want to say, we're going to level up pass-through and give you the best pass-through quality. That's obviously me putting together some assumptions, but we'll have to see how that turns out. One thing I would say here, though, is I think some people are once again being unrealistic about pricing. Any headset that's going to be a standalone headset like this with 4K micro OLED displays is going to be expensive. at minimum, we're talking about $1,500, realistically $2,000. Obviously, Pico has been very aggressive with pricing in the past, so maybe they do come in at that aggressive $1,500. Maybe maybe I'm proven wrong, and ByteDance says we're going to take a loss on every headset and start selling it for like 1,200 or something. The point here is I'm saying none of the ranges get down to Quest 3 level for this headset. That's not what we're talking about here. So you know, I see some people like saying Steam Frame is going to be obsolete. Well, is it? Because Steam Frame is probably going to be, I'm just throwing out a number here, like $700, $800, something like that. I don't know. I'm just making a guess, to be clear. This is going to be like more than twice the price, probably. Optimistically, twice the price. So I just want to repeat that you don't get these micro OLED displays for free. This isn't going to come with a dongle for PC VR. It's not going to have some of the advanced features of the Steam Frame controller. Like, well, maybe it does. I don't know. We don't even know if this thing will have controllers. That's the thing. There's no knowledge of that. It might not even have controllers. So some people are getting very premature about declaring this to be, the Steam Frame killer. I think this is ByteDance's Apple Vision Pro competitor, is a better way to put this, and Samsung Galaxy XR competitor to another degree. Their strategy of having Pico OS is going to be tough here. Same problem with Meta, right? Without Galaxy XR, without Android XR, you don't get the Play Store. In China, it's much, much less of a problem because Pico actually on their store has a lot of 2D apps. The Chinese equivalent of Netflix, for example, is actually available on the Pico store and as a 2D app, so you can just go download it. In the Western market, it's going to be a lot tougher because, again, all of these apps are gated behind Google and the Play Store, so that's going to be a big challenge there. Yeah, I see Liberty Sound saying for Steam Frame, Valve said under $1,000 already. Yeah, we reported that on UploadVR.com and on minute 0 of the Steam Frame announcement. It was in both of our articles and pretty much every other article, I think, and we said it at the time. Very aware of that. I'm just saying that's a massive range. Could be 600, 700, 800, 900, right? And even still, by the way, Valve said that their aim, and we made this very clear in our articles, they said our aim is to be lower than the Index full kit, which is $1,000. So that actually leaves room for them failing. The global supply chains are not in a very predictable place right now. But yeah, I think people have this desire for someone to come out of the blue and blow Steam Frame out of the water, and that I don't think that's what this headset is. Before we move on here, I think we should point out that there was another report from the Information earlier this year, so the Information being the same outlet that predicted Pico 4 Ultra and this, that said that Pico was working on an ultralight headset with a tethered puck. So that's exactly what we expect of Meta next year. If you're not clued in here, our sources, the Information, and the Wall Street Journal suggest that Meta's next headset next year, 2026, will not be a traditional form factor Quest. Instead, it will be something that I have dubbed Quest Air, but we have no idea what it'll actually be called. Quest Air was one of the names that was floated at one point. Who knows what it gets called? Let's just, for the simplicity of this, call it Quest Air, noting very, very clearly that we are not suggesting that we have any knowledge of it actually being called Quest Air. So this Quest Air would, instead of having the compute and battery in the headset, would have it in a tethered puck. So like Apple Vision Pro, but it's not just the battery in this puck, it's also a chip that's doing the rendering, according to these reports and our sources as well. And it would have an open periphery design and an extremely lightweight design. So the idea is that they want this thing to be like big screen beyond level weight rather than, Quest. We're talking about Meta here. Meta's next headset for next year. So very much so focused on, sitting down, seated games, giant flat screen monitors and cinema screens, that kind of stuff, productivity, movies on a plane, Quest Air. So there was a report from the Information earlier this year that suggested that Pico was also going to do this in 2026, right? Some of these companies in China are obviously known for doing copying. There were some copying for Pico at some point. We saw There was a point where Pico's OS being a bit better about this now and having their own identity, but there was a point where Pico OS was a shameless copy of the Quest OS at the time, and it really, I mean, down to the exact, structures of the tabs and the colors and things. And I remember using it and thinking, come on. And I think since then they've got their own kind of identity. I remember, I don't think it ever launched, but they had like this Pico Worlds thing that was supposed to be like Horizon Worlds, and again, all the UI looked like it was a straight copy. But it does look like Pico and Meta are both going to do this ultralight thing. But this kind of raises the question: is this ultralight headset the same one as this 4K one, or is Pico launching two headsets next year? Is it launching, a Apple Vision Pro competitor with like 4K per eye, and maybe the ultralight's like 2K or 3K per eye? We don't know. It's unclear whether these headsets are the same thing, just with reporting coming all over the place, or is Pico launching two headsets? A Quest Air competitor and a Vision Pro competitor. We don't know. We'll have to find out next year. Liberty Sound AU brings up the question that I always think to myself when we hear these reports about pucks. Having the chip in the puck would mean a fan in your pocket, though. Might not work well. I can see the chip being in headset still. Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying. All of the reports are suggesting that the chip will be in the puck, the actual rendering chip. It's possible that the dual chip architecture we're talking about here is kind of taking, if we talk about Vision Pro, the M5 equivalent to the pocket, and then the R1 stays in the headset. That might be what Meta is doing too. It might be what Pico's doing. Maybe that's how these rumors make sense, right? You actually do still have a lot of the like sensor stuff being processed on the headset, and then it's the rendering done in the puck, and then you do get a little bit more play with the thermals, right? Possible. I also don't really see how you can just magically get the performance of a headset in a battery that goes in your pocket, a puck that goes in your pocket. It seems like there's an easy possibility for thermal throttling. Look, maybe they just accept that, right? Maybe they just say, like, you're playing the headset, right? You're in a game, you're playing Demio, and your pocket starts to feel really effing hot, and you take it out. Or maybe it even thermal throttles, and you get a big pop up, puck heat exceeding maximum allowed, please take the puck out of pocket or other confined space and give it some air. That might be the trade-off that they say here, right? It's quite clear that these companies are going for the every gram matters philosophy that big screen, is lives by. We have to acknowledge that headsets are not comfortable for most people. They are 500-gram face bricks are never going to go mainstream, folks. It is very necessary to get these things slimmer and lighter, and these companies want to do it as quickly as possible. It's one of the biggest issues with these headsets today. They're sure you can get your WebXR strap and start balancing the weight all over the place, but at the end of the day, it's still you can't magic it away, right? It doesn't solve the problem completely. It helps. It's a mitigation, but there's no substitute truly for a headset that is, say, 150 grams, right? Like there's no substitute there. I see Spatial Bigs bring up, what about vapor cooling systems like iPhone 17 Pro? They could absolutely be using that. Again, not a silver bullet. A vapor chamber doesn't magically produce the same kind of heating as an actual fan, pulling in cool air and pushing it out. It helps. It's better than before. But you can still thermal throttle an iPhone 17 Pro pretty damn quickly if you go into ARKit, funny enough, and do a very heavily intensive 3D app in ARKit. You can still get that thing to thermal throttle pretty damn soon. But yes, we do not know exactly what Pico is going to ship, but we're getting a good idea here. I see Dutch Tiger saying maybe the puck is a clip-on belt kind of thing. No. Well, look, maybe. I shouldn't say no. These companies are trying to produce a mass market consumer product. You can't assume that someone's wearing a belt. You can't assume anything if you want something to be like a mass market consumer product. You can't assume that they're wearing clothes. It could be someone wearing a dress, right? Where do you clip it onto a dress? It could be, someone might want to use it while they're just wearing their boxers around the house. They might want to. I think a dress is a great example of how this just falls apart. You're going to have to tell the user, go put on different clothes. Any product like this, that the answer is go put on different kind of clothes. It's not a mass market product. it needs to fit in a pocket. My understanding is that that is a core design goal of the Meta Quest Air, or whatever the hell they're going to call it. They want it to fit in your pocket. That's the last I heard. I don't know if they've actually achieved it, but I think it would be a very compromised product if it could not be. Look, it might be that they just say, look, we're going to go with the trade offs. You do need to go and put a belt on your dress. If you want to wear this, you're going to need to put on, the right kind of clothes. Maybe they say that. Or maybe they say, look, this is meant to be used seated. Just put it on the seat beside you. If you're standing up, then yeah, you're going to have to go and get something else. It's just unlikely, I think. I think it would be a shocking trade off that would be a big problem practically as a consumer product. I see someone saying maybe it's a wireless puck. I can confirm that it is not. There are two problems with a wireless puck. One is you still have to then have the battery on the headset, right? You don't offload the battery because the puck, you can't wirelessly transmit power like that. And there's obviously small scale experiments, but not for the sake of this conversation. You can't wirelessly transmit power like that. So that you then have that. The other problem is that you actually then have to put a better chip on board. You have to actually do more things on board. It ends up being something that's much more like the current architecture of using a PC. Now, obviously, this has been done in Orion, the Orion glasses for Meta, but you have to understand that they're actually sending a lot less data there because Orion is like 480p displays, and a lot of it is transparent. So you're actually, say you're rendering like one Pikachu on the ground, you're only actually sending very few pixels relative to sending the millions of pixels you're sending to a VR display. And so you're putting it kind of this one position, and Orion is obviously used to do this. Orion uses a bunch of custom chips. They actually have like a custom wireless chip, a custom chip on the puck and on the glasses that is just designed for doing this specific wireless stuff. But again, it's at like orders and orders of magnitude lower pixels than a headset. So I know for a fact that the Meta headset in development is not a wireless puck. The Quest Air, as we'll call it for this conversation, it is a wired puck. I see Creative saying, whatever happened to Backpack VR? I mean, look, it's something that some people still put together for location-based stuff, but I think what happened to Backpack VR was standalone got really, really good. Apple Vision Pro M5, for example, gives you the same performance of those backpack PCs, but in a standalone form factor where you just need to run the battery down to your pocket. So, if we didn't live in a world with Apple Vision Pro, you'd maybe still have a little bit of demand, but like if you want to be a business and do that, you get a Vision Pro. If you need to do like high fidelity rendering wirelessly. The other thing is that a lot of location based now used wireless streaming. The other thing that happened to it was standalone with wireless streaming. So a lot of these LBEs that used to use backpacks replaced the backpacks with like a Vive Focus 3 plus a PC, with the PC doing the rendering wirelessly, just like, AirLink, Virtual Desktop, Steam Link, the same kind of technology, just done by HTC, Pico 4, same thing. And yeah, like it's not a great UX for consumer stuff. It's obviously, look, it's a very niche idea for enthusiasts. And a lot of these LBE places, I'm talking about like VR arcades, were overjoyed the day that they could replace their big bulky backpacks with a wireless PC or a standalone experience. Okay, I think we're pretty much ready to talk about the next topics now. I'm seeing someone say that maybe it can switch between glasses mode and headset mode. It's an interesting idea of doing some very, very like a headset. If we did have a wireless puck in a future headset far off, you could have an idea of like it does some very basic stuff on board, and then you bring the puck nearby and it can now do like advanced rendering. It's not a bad idea at all. Interesting. Yeah, I see Dutch Tiger pointing out most dresses don't have pockets either. Yep, look, very good point. But at the very least, you can kind of you can carry the puck, or you can, like in some designs, dock it to the back of the head. Right? There's some Vision Pro straps like that. You could. I'm sure that people will come up on month one, Bobo VR or whoever else will come up with, Quest Air um, head straps that put the puck on the back of your head. But when you start to get like a really big puck, like a Magic Leap size one, that becomes impossible at that point, right? You start to get into like a form factor that just can't. I think when I was hearing people talk about like a belt mounted puck, I was thinking about like the Magic Leap 2 solution where they have two options pretty much. You either do clip it to your belt or you wear a sling, which is obviously just wildly impractical for its own reasons, right? Let me see if I have a picture of what I'm referring to here. The classic picture I bring up all the time when we start talking about these like really, really bulky um, pucks. In the meantime, yeah, here I've got the image right here. For anyone watching, for anyone on the audio podcast, you can just look up Magic Leap 2 and puck on Google Images. You see what I'm talking about here when you start to get to something that is like much, much bigger than pocketable. You have to either have this big sling or something. Fine for enterprise, dead for consumer. Okay, let's move on to talk about our next topics. And there are 4 topics here. They're all about AI for 3D layout and reconstruction. And so if you have been following the world of AI, you will know that outside VR, there's been massive, massive improvements in recent months. And just like there have been in recent years, it is such a rapidly accelerating field of technology where months in AI are like years in every other field. And a lot of these advantages are trickling down into VR and AR, or systems that are applicable or useful for VR and AR. And we're going to cover some of them today. On a complete side note, I have been playing around with Gemini 3 Pro and Nano Banana Pro, which is its image tool, in the past few days. And it is absolutely stunning how intelligent Gemini 3 Pro is and how capable Nano Banana Pro, its image generation and editing tool, is. So, on the generation part of that, one thing you should all note is that never trust any image you see ever again. This is the first model that has reached the point where it can generate and edit complex images that are indistinguishable from real. If you haven't seen the examples of this yet, you might think I'm just hyping some nonsense and you've seen it all before and there'll be 6 fingers on these images. I promise you, go and look into these examples. I've played around with it myself. I've done edits of my own photos. Remarkable. This is the ChatGPT moment for image generation models. We finally have a model that is beyond what anyone would have predicted a few years ago. It is amazing. It's not the generation that actually impresses me the most. The generation, I expected we would get there. It's the editing. You can provide it with an image and essentially give the command that you might have given to a Photoshop expert that would then spend multiple hours doing a painstaking, detailed edit. And it does this in a few seconds. And it's not like the old image models where it wouldn't follow exactly what you were saying and it would mess up like the faces of the people and, screw up the details. This maintains the parts of the image that aren't edited and is able to make edits that, again, are the kind of thing I'm pretty proficient in Photoshop myself. There are tasks that it would take me 4 hours to do in Photoshop that this thing can do in 10 seconds. And I just think everyone should be aware of where we are in image models before we start getting into some 3D stuff. That we're past that point. We are past the point where it can do indistinguishable for complex tasks, and it text now too. I'm like, I remember an example the other day. I got it to like generate a fake video game, like Nintendo Switch game cover, and then I said to give me an image where that cover is open on a table in a room, and the game, this fictional game that doesn't exist, is playing on a TV behind it. And this image looked photorealistic. This could have been an image that someone just, a picture that someone took on their phone in a room of a game that doesn't exist. And all of the text, including all the little details on the back, with the PEGI or ESRB, whatever your country is, details and all the multiplayer stuff and the minute text and the HUD on the screen and all of these things were just perfect. And so I'll get over this now, but in the past few days, I have been genuinely shocked by how good Gemini 3 Pro and its image generation tool is. And if you haven't caught up with that yet, if you've been kind of, not really paying attention to the tech news in the past week or so, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but we're in a new world. The world has fundamentally changed in the past week. So let's just kind of get through that. Okay. Let's go on to our topics for today. The first one is something a lot more rudimentary than what I was just describing. It is Meta's WorldGen. So this is a model from Meta, the system, I should say, not just an AI model. It is a kind of whole end-to-end system here that AI generates a 3D world from a text prompt. There are some very important caveats that we want to point out here. Namely, well, let's first be clear about what we're talking about here. This is not a Gaussian splat. It's not, a Genie 3 style interactive video. This is a system that incorporates both 2D and 3D models within a large chain of about 12 different steps that then produces a regular, set of 3D tri-mesh models with positions in a world, just like a game editor. And in fact, these are compatible with a game editor, right? It's generating a terrain, 3D models, placing the 3D models within that terrain, and a skybox and some kind of textures and stuff for it. And I think it also does like a nav mesh for your collisions and your AI. It does like all the collision stuff. So it's game engine ready. You could, in theory, take this output, throw it into Unity, and add a character controller, and you have a game, right? Just to be clear of what we're talking about here, it's not some sort of neural radiance field or Gaussian splat or anything like that. This is a traditional game engine style world that this is generating. And so it looks like this is the kind of technology that Meta wants to use to power Horizon Studio, its upcoming revamp overhaul of its Horizon desktop editor experience. Where if you remember back at Connect, they talked about this idea that you would be able to just, with a text prompt, generate this entire interactive virtual world, right? And in generating a Horizon world, not just each asset one by one and placing them yourself, but actually getting the system to build you a world and then through text prompts being able to refine it. And so back in, I think, August it was, the environment generation that launched and is existing today in Horizon Desktop Editor is very, very primitive. It's just generating these islands. It's just an island generator that generates these very simple islands. At Connect, they obviously showed this massively improved vision of where they want it to be. But it's quite clear now that this was just a vision. This is not working tech that they actually had ready to go. And this is something that they're kind of Hail Mary style hoping AI advances fast enough to deliver in 2026. Because this WorldGen model that they have presented in the last week is very quite limited. And they have specifically confirmed that they are not shipping this as a feature of Horizon Worlds Desktop Editor or Horizon Studio, this being WorldGen 1, for two reasons. One is that it only generates these 50 by 50 meter worlds, so it's just not generating large enough. The other thing is it takes too long. Apparently, this is not a couple of minutes, which is what they want it to be. Reading machine lines, could it be dozens of minutes? Could it be hours? They don't say, but it does seem like this could be a model that takes a very, very long time to generate. And the quality here is not great, so this is not ready to deliver on their grand promises of Connect. But as we know in AI, as I've been pointing out, and as we've seen with so many of these models on throughout, image generation, obviously text-only LLMs, when it comes to these interactive video world models from Google,
you can see massive strides between versions. And so I expect that WorldGen 2 is probably going to be a massively primitive and make WorldGen 1 look as primitive as it kind of does look if you look at it with a critical eye at all. This is not good. This is an interesting start from a technical level, but there were procedural generation systems before ML that could do better than this, to be frank. Uh, and so I think Meta is going to really hope that World Gen 2 is a big improvement. And then maybe, World Gen 3 is what it really takes to make this something kind of that actually gets to their goal that they presented here at Connect, where you literally are able to just text prompt a virtual VR world into existence. Let's see what some of the comments are on this one, World Gen. Probably the least impressive of what we're going to talk about today. In fact, definitely. Yeah, LL is pointing out the slop dilemma here, where um, people call AI generated content slop when it's low quality, and then when it gets high quality in certain realms, like say images now, the definition of slop changes to something that was created with low effort. It's the changing goalposts of what slop is. Everyone knows that what it was meant originally was it all looked like slop, right? It just looked bad, it wasn't impressive. Once you get impressive outputs, then it becomes, oh, it's slop because it wasn't human made. So there's kind of a moving goalpost there. I see Wiper saying that they find that this kind of style is obviously a big improvement over Horizon World style so far. I see TJ7 saying they used the desktop world creator. It worked ish. So yeah, there is like a very basic AI agent in desktop editor today that is, it can do a lot of editor tasks, but it's really not where they want it to be. And they're doing, again, with this Horizon Studio, which is supposed to be entering beta in the coming months and probably isn't going to be widely rolled out for, probably till like mid to late 2026 is my guess. They are doing a completely overhauled AI agent. It's a much, much more capable agent according to Meta. We'll see how that pans out. Andrew Tech saying that as a former graphic designer turned programmer, they love being able to get more done faster with AI. Yep, that is certainly true. And Not Suspicious pointing out that there's plenty of human slop on the Quest store. It doesn't take an AI to make slop. Human beings can make slop as well. I see F-Licer saying it's economically very, very bad. Yeah, there's certainly major concerns about how the global economy adapts to some human cognitive labor being automated. The argument, I think for a long time, the fears of automation may be true for lower levels, but I think a lot of this is going to be, to kind of use a overused phrase at this point, it's not going to be an AI that takes some people's job. It's going to be a human using AI. The combination of human being and AI, the partnership there, the kind of using the AI for menial tasks, for doing tasks faster, means that you can iterate faster. You can do the meaningful taste stuff, right? You can be the one that discerns taste, that puts things together. It's like being the manager of a team for people who don't have the capital to hire a team. That's kind of what the promise is here. That's the positive look at what AI is going to bring to things like game design and development and software development in general, and running all kinds of businesses. Is going to be like having very relatively low cost, a subscription fee or whatever, in this case free, employees that you can use to bring your ideas to life. And those employees today are going to be kind of stupid in some ways and kind of smart in other ways. And over time, they're going to get less stupid and more smart. And that's kind of the trend here. I see Wabo bringing up the opposition to the economic argument, saying almost all human of cognitive labor from the 1950s is now gone, but unemployment among cognitive workers is not 100%. People will find new jobs. Yeah, that is interesting for sure. So yes, that's true. The computer used to be a human job. A computer was not an object. It was a person, a human being that computed stuff, that did, mathematics and other kind of tabulations and formulations. And now today we almost forget that. I'd say there's a lot of Gen Z that wouldn't know that a computer was a person, maybe even a lot of millennials, right? And when you go outside cognitive tasks and kind of broaden that, automation is not new fundamentally. the greatest tool of automation in human history was the combine harvester. The combine harvester automated more jobs than any other technology or tool ever by far. For most of human history since the agricultural revolution, most people worked in farming, and most people's job was to make sure that everyone didn't starve. Just for to be clear, some people have this rosy idea of the past as some, you know, fantasy movie. It's not. Most of human history was trying not to starve, and from the agricultural revolution, it was trying to make sure the harvest didn't fail and tilling the fields and stuff. The combine harvester meant that now today, what is it, like 2% of people are in farming and food, like a lot fewer. Another example is elevator operators. I always think is an interesting one. They're actually, because this is an interesting one because there was a big political opposition. There were people when automatic elevators were invented. It's a quaint idea today that any elevator wouldn't be automatic. We think of an elevator as an automatic tool. It wasn't when it was originally invented. A human operator would actually operate the elevator. And there was a massive political resistance to the automation of elevators. People were saying, like this is unethical and these are big corporations just trying to increase their profits in their hotels and buildings. And, we should fight to make it a law that elevators should have to have a human being operating them. And obviously, it seems quaint and silly today. So that doesn't mean that today's arguments are wrong. Absolutely not. There are people who have very valid arguments here. I'm not trying to dismiss that. I'm just bringing in some historical context that, you know, the current dilemmas that we're going through are not actually as unique as we think they are. This is obviously a very unique point in human history for various reasons, and there are ways in which AI is going to go further on a quantitative or qualitative level that is just beyond any of these past examples, but the general idea is something that has existed in history. I see someone saying, why are you yapping about Horizon Editor if you never you can use it? I have used the Horizon Editor. I haven't used this one. Nobody has. It's not out yet, Horizon Studio, but I have used the Horizon Desktop Editor. Well, obviously played around with it. And maybe that wasn't referring to me, but if it is, I have. Odd thing to say if it was referring to me. Yeah, so some very interesting debate here in the comments about AI. Let's move on to some more interesting use cases. This WorldGen is very primitive, I think, and not kind of something that is undoable without AI even. There are, as I said, procedural world generation systems that are better. Let's talk about our next topic, which is about how AI can bring real world objects into VR in seconds. What do I mean by this? So it is now technologically possible for a social VR platform to implement the following feature. At any time, you can press a button within the game that toggles on pass-through. You go out of VR. And in pass-through, you bring yourself near to a real-world object and you point at it and you press a button. Pass-through goes away and you're back in VR with the people you're hanging out with in social VR, or maybe you're alone in a world. And less than 5 seconds later, in your virtual character's hand, your avatar's hand, that real world object is now held as a virtual object. That is now entirely technologically possible. So you could do show and tell with something that you physically crafted in the real world with people in VR chat or Horizon Worlds. Now, to be clear, VR chat and Horizon Worlds have not implemented the feature I've just described. I'm saying that they could. It is technologically possible for them to do this. The other thing that could be useful about this is for decorating your home in a VR environment, in a social VR platform, sorry. For example, the new immersive home of Meta Horizon OS has some tables and areas where things could be decorated. Obviously, you could have like a entirely virtual object marketplace, completely normal, but why not also be able to bring in some of your favorite creations, your favorite gifts, your favorite keepsakes and little things around your home in real life and bring them in seconds. So there's actually an interesting demo on SideQuest of this general idea, not for social VR, but just the idea of bringing real world objects into mixed reality, developed by Takahiro Horikawa. And it's actually about a year old, even a bit more than a year old. And it uses this model, an AI model from 2014, Uh, it's using Stability AI's Stable Fast 3D API, which is powered by a model based on TripOSR, which is a model from a year and a half ago now. And so, how this works in this SideQuest app, it's linked in our article about this, is you put your hands together like this. If you can't see and you're watching, it's the kind of gesture you make by putting your index finger and thumb 90 degrees to each other, and then framing out the image on each diagonal corner. And then that takes a quick snapshot of the object. And then about 5 seconds later, in the position of the real world object, you get a 3D VR version. Interesting proof of concept, but note that I was using a model from 18 months ago. And what I keep saying when it comes to AI, the massive, significant pace of improvement here is such that 18 months ago might as well be a century ago. The reason we're talking about this now is that the first model has come out that I think really passes this is not brilliant, but decent quality. And this is Meta's SAM 3D Objects API. Model, sorry, not API, which is the new state of the art for generating 3D assets from a single image. You can see on screen right now, if you're watching the podcast, an example here. And this is like a tough example I've given it, which is this is one I ran through myself, just of a publicly available image. And this is a really tough scenario where you have a lot of details, and it doesn't capture it perfectly, but it captures it pretty well. You can go and play with this yourself, though. There's a link in our article on UploadVR.com to the Meta AI Playground with this model. And so what you do here on your desktop, PC, or tablet, or VR headset browser, it doesn't work very well with mobile. The site just isn't responsive design. You can upload any image from your camera, from the internet, whatever you want, and click on an object in that image and watch as 5 seconds later you get a little, WebGL 3D model that you can then spin around with your mouse or finger. And you can actually also download it as a PLY file. They don't give you the texture. They will give you the model, the shape, if you want to download that. And to be clear, the model itself, the AI model, can do the texture as well. That's what you're seeing here, but you would need to host that yourself. This is an open source model, so people can do that. They can run it on AWS or whatever, Google Cloud, Azure. That's what any company wanting to use this commercially would have to do. You would have to actually host it yourself at your own cost. Meta is not providing an API for this. They're not going to give it to you for free either. The demo online is just an example to show you the quality. It's just meant for testing it out and giving a kind of demo of the experience. I think you should go play around with this. Note that it's not for humans or animals. I'm not saying like it's not like it's not going to try, but it's not going to do a good result. This is meant for inanimate objects. The model is specifically trained for inanimate objects. But try it right now, right? Go and feed it a picture you took of some cool object in your house and watch as in seconds it turns it into a 3D model from a single image. Very impressive stuff if you've never seen anything like this. And even if you have seen anything like this, this is the new state of the art. I see that like Andrew Tech is saying shape from silhouettes, marching cubes are old. This just automates and makes it way easier. Look, to be clear, it's been possible for years now to, for example, take a few dozen shots of an object, panning around it, and then put it through a photogrammetry tool that brings you a 3D model, right? Epic has Reality Scan in the App Store. Apple even has like an API built into iOS for the Pro iPhones that any app can use to do this. It takes about 5 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on the object. And you're doing, again, dozens of angles, sometimes hundreds to get a complex object. That's all well and good. Great. But that doesn't do what I described at the start of this discussion, which is in less than 5 seconds, let you pull in an object from the real world into VR. I'm just saying, like, this is the impressive part here. It's a single image is the input, and it runs in seconds. So that's the impressive part. And I want to be clear, this is not making, there's also been models for years that do like SDFs and these like NERFs and, kind of mini Gaussian splats and things like that. This is making, maybe I buried the headline here, this is making a regular tri-mesh 3D object. This is not some exotic data format that has to be, fancily rendered. This is a FBX or whatever you want, right? This is a regular 3D model that is ready to go in a game engine instantaneously. That VR Chat can load, that Horizon Worlds can load, that WebGL can load, right? This is a regular 3D model for that a game engine can relight. Like I'm seeing some electric VR room saying that they just tried the Gemini 3 Pro Nano Banana Pro model. Just make sure if you are using it that it definitely is the Nano Banana Pro. There is a Nano Banana from like a year ago or maybe months ago now. It's hard to tell in AI. Everything's going so fast. But Nano Banana Pro, yeah, I think it was even months ago. Nano Banana Pro is the one you really want to get to if you're trying that out. Yeah. So I see Davin Bigelow pointing out that you could actually use this in VR. Very, very clever thought there. There's no reason that this would have to be passed through. You could actually theoretically turn any object that you're seeing in a VR game into a 3D object that you could then have yourself, kind of like a screenshot equivalent of pulling out a 3D model. Now, again, to be clear, the quality here is not perfect, right? You can see on screen it's not perfect. This is a very bad example. To be fair, I've given it a tough one, like the intricacy of the leaves and plants of a potted plant. Again, please go and try this out yourself. The link is right there in our article. You can try this out in seconds on your desktop. It really is that easy. You just click upload, pick a file, and go. Try it out. Give me your impressions of yourself. I see Caleb saying that I definitely buried the lead about this being a regular 3D model. I kind of I thought I implied that by saying that this can be pulled into a VR chat or something like that. But yeah, just to be clear, yes, this is a regular 3D model. This is not some like exotic neural thing. It's just a regular old 3D model. What is it called? I see someone asking. This is Meta's SAM 3D objects, SAM 3D objects, segment anything model. They have a 2D version of this, which is obviously just SAM, segment anything. And this is SAM 3D. And there's actually two different SAM 3D models. There's SAM 3D objects and SAM 3D person. And the SAM 3D person is designed to actually get a 3D model of human poses, but not with textures. And SAM 3D objects is for getting a model of inanimate objects and with textures. Yeah, I see Electric VRM saying they definitely use Nano Banana Pro and they turned their dog into Mario Bros. And it looks good enough and doesn't mind. It doesn't look AI generated. Yeah, again. Yeah, the Nano Banana Pro thing, I just want to like reiterate, shockingly good. Like truly one of those things where it is like using ChatGPT for the first time. It's that level. I'm really not exaggerating. I'm sure there are some people watching that think I'm hyping, exaggerating. Go try it yourself and you see I'm not. I see LL saying that they remember Meta showing something like this years ago at Connect. You're right. There was a Michael Abrash demo where this was talked about as some far off exotic technology that you could actually bring real world objects into the metaverse when they were all talking about the metaverse all the time. Bring any 3D object in the metaverse. We have this research that one day in the far future can do this. Well, we're here, folks. This is the future. You can do this today. And yeah, personally, I think that pulling objects into a VR world itself is cool, but I would love to decorate, VR worlds. You could go in real life to a pottery class and make something and then bring that in and have it in your Horizon home. And then your friend gets invited over and you can say, this is that from that. And yeah, it's just, there's infinite possibilities here, right? I mean, you could also just use it to bring in posters from your real life if they did this. This would be a way, just walk up to your poster. It's going to be just a flat, kind of almost quad of a 3D object, but then just take that 3D object, right, your poster, and then just put it up in your Horizon home. Just to be clear, folks, Meta has not announced this, but if you look at like Horizon Hyperscapes, it's clear that this is my first question, or one of my first questions at Connect with Horizon Hyperscape was, this is cool. What about objects instead of a whole scene? And they said, yeah, we're thinking about it. So maybe in 2026, we see Meta use its own AI model in its own products. Crazy idea, isn't it, folks? Let's move on to the next topic then. that is, let's see where we are on the topic list. I think it's going to be Marble, is it? Yes. So if you thought this was impressive, wait do you see this? Or maybe you've read the article and you know what I'm going to talk about. This is Marble. It is another one that you can try yourself. I love these ones where we can say in the article, you know, you don't have to take their word for it. There's a literal web link we can give you right here. Click this URL and try it right now. That's the best way to show anything. I'm really a huge fan of all these companies these days doing this instead of, I think we're in such a bullshit landscape these days that it's the talk is so cheap that you do need a demo a lot of the time now to get people on board. So this is Marble. And this is a very wide ranging and complicated model. We really struggled to find a headline that encapsulates it. For our use cases, the headline we went for is Marble turns an image into a WebXR volumetric scene in minutes. And that's true. That's something you can do for free right now on the Marble Labs link that we have in the article. You can take a single image of your room, or maybe you went on somewhere cool on holidays, or maybe it's not your image, you just found on the internet, of a room or a scene or whatever, and it will turn that image into a volumetric 6 DOF scene that you can, in WebXR in your web browser on Quest or Vision Pro or whatever headset you're using, explore, walk around. So we're not talking about just 2Difying it or 3Difying a 2D image. It's turning it into a 6 DOF volumetric scene. And this is, to be clear, Gaussian splatting. We're on to Gaussian splatting, which is kind of the magic technology almost behind a lot of this kind of 3D scene reconstruction. It's the same tech that powers Horizon Hyperscape that we're going to talk about. So compared to Horizon Hyperscape, where you're doing like a 5 to 10 minute scan, that under the hood, what is happening, by the way, when you're scanning is the headset is taking dozens, if not hundreds, of posed 2D images, right? Images with a position, and then feeding that into Meta's model on the server. And then Meta's model takes like multiple hours, 5 or 8 hours to process all that. Marble is on the other spectrum here, where instead of doing hundreds of images and hours, it's doing by default at least one image and minutes, maybe 5 minutes or so. So you can go from, again, go try it out in the background right now if you're watching, give it an image, and by the time I finish yapping about this, I'm sure it'll have your scene ready to go, and then you just log into your same account on your Quest headset or whatever, and you can be in VR, in WebXR, in that volumetric scene. And so that is only the most basic feature, I would say, of Marble. Like that's the base level feature. But it's actually a lot more than that. They call it like a multimodal world model because you don't even need to feed it an image. You can also just do a text prompt. You can do an image plus a text prompt. If you pay for the $20 a month subscription, you can feed it multiple images. So you can give it the front direction and the back, right? So you're in a room, you take one perspective from this way and one from the other way, for example, and then it can do the two sides of the room instead of hallucinating the details. Because if you give it one image, to be clear, just to be very clear about this, it's going to hallucinate everything around the frame. It's going to be relatively plausible, surprisingly plausible, actually, in my experience of trying this, but it's a hallucination. But you can just give it multiple images, and then it's not, there's obviously going to be some hallucination there in turning an image into a volumetric scene, but it's going to be a lot less the more images you feed it as source. Or, again, this is if you pay the subscription, you can give it a short video. Or, and then this is the one that I haven't seen anyone else do. They have a tool called Chisel. I should probably point out who the hell World Labs is, actually. Founded last year by Fei Li, who is one of the pioneers of modern AI. She is best known for creating the ImageNet dataset that helped enable the rapid advancement of computer vision in the 2010s. She had the insight that the lack of high quality labeled data was the critical bottleneck for computer vision. In many ways, a lot of the computer vision we all take for granted today of hand tracking and all kinds of things is actually because of ImageNet and the innovation that spurred. So that's who this is by, Fei Li. Getting back to Chisel. So I've talked about how you can do for free a single image or a text prompt, for paid multiple images or an image or video as your input. Chisel lets you create a scene with 3D tools that are similar to a game editor. So it's as if you're playing around with the shapes, the primitive shapes in Unity, right? You're doing untextured, but you're just doing a shape of a scene, right? You're literally just building it. It's a web-based tool that feels like you're using Unity. You're moving shapes, you're scaling shapes, you're positioning shapes. I think we all understand what I'm saying. And then with a text prompt on top of that, you turn the untextured primitive shape 3D scene that you've just put together into a volumetric Gaussian splat. So you're getting a level of precision and control. This is something I think is just like, this shocked me. Actually, I played around with it a little bit. I did the subscription for 1 month. I've never seen anything like this. It's as this the potential here. We're talking about, when we talk about these text prompts as the base input, there's obviously a lack of precision there. You're describing the environment, but the AI is putting together. You could describe in details and paragraphs exactly what you want, but there's always going to be a little bit of a loss between what you're imagining and what you get. Well, with this chisel tool, chisel powering into marble, you're able to literally position out the environment as if like you're kind of like making like a paper mache version of your virtual world. You're putting the shapes, you're deciding where things go, the structure, the exact shapes of the hallways, or the platform or the stage or whatever the hell you're making. And then with this AI model, it takes the shape of what you've given it, the shape of this virtual scene that you've given it, and then from your text prompt adds detail to the geometry and adds texture and all these things as a Gaussian splat. It also supports interactive editing. So once you have this output, whether it be from Chisel or from input images, if you pay the subscription, you can then do very precise editing on like an object level of the scene. And here's the real kicker. And this one I really was not expecting. All of this is by default Gaussian splats. If you don't know what I mean by Gaussian splat, it's like millions of semi-transparent colored blobs in 3D space. It's kind of like an alternative to, the tri-mesh system, having like meshes and textures. It's a different way of 3D rendering. It's what powers a lot of this photorealistic stuff recently, Vario Teleport, Niantic Scaniverse, Horizon Hyperscapes. But Marble has an interesting feature where you can export this as a traditional 3D mesh. Now, the quality of it is going to then fall down a bit. It's not, I don't think it's amazing, but it's still crazy that you could do this and then kind of pull it into a regular game editor. And so you can actually go from putting a basic shape of a virtual world to a Gaussian splat that has all the textures and details you want. Like texture isn't the right word in the context of a Gaussian splat, but I'm using it in terms of what you get as a result. Color maybe is the better word, color and detail. And then it does take multiple hours to go from splat to 3D mesh, but you can do so. So yeah, this is, according to Marble Labs, a first-in-class generative multimodal world model. And I think you should go and try it out. I tried it out. The quality is obviously not the same as Horizon Hyperscape because, again, it's one image, 5 minutes versus hundreds of images, 8 hours. But it's remarkable to be able to feed an image and then minutes later be in your headset in a 6-dot volumetric scene. And it's another one of those, as I keep saying, that is a you viewer/reader, please go and try it. Don't listen to me. Do listen to me, please, hopefully, but don't take my word for it. Especially if you think I'm hyping it, go and try it. Go and try it yourself. There's nothing that stops you from doing it. It's free to try. Feed an image. Now, the one massive caveat I should give here, actually, that maybe you don't want to, is if you don't pay, your scenes are public. Let's just actually get that very clear. I think it should be clear in the UI, but just in case you miss it, you have to be subscribed for $20 a month to make your scene private. So make sure you upload an image that you're fine for the world to see. I don't think anyone's going to see it, right? There are obviously thousands of things. You could put it together and then delete it as soon as you're done. But just be wary of that. It's obviously a needle in a haystack situation, but be wary that by default it is publicly available. So they have to make money somehow. The demo is there to show you the tech. They don't really want you to. They want you to pay for it, obviously. And I think $20 to experience something like this, especially with chisel and things like that, not a terrible trade. Yeah. Um, so I think we should expect some big things out of World Labs, given this is their first kind of big major flagship release. All of this is pointing to a world where 3D creation becomes more accessible, where you can put together prototypes. Even if you think like this isn't good enough for a game, whatever, use it as a prototype. Put together. You have an idea for a game world and you want to do some iteration in your mind and see it out loud. It could be like the equivalent of sketching. You could, at the very minimum, see it as the equivalent of sketching out a concept design. Play around with chisel, put it together, see what it feels like, and make some changes, and then go and do it with traditional tools. That's at the very minimum. So I just think it's astonishing where we are in terms of the capabilities of some of these systems, and they're so early. This is what you have to realize: these are all still so early. These are all of these companies are already, for every model I've just talked about today, working on the next one that scales everything up further. And yeah, I see Barak saying that they were in the beta for Marble, and not only does the export for TriMesh exist as an option, but you can also import the splat into Unity, and Marble gives you collider mesh data so that you don't fall through. You can put a character controller in AI. Yeah, a lot of these companies are realizing that if you want these to be as part of tool sets, traditional tool sets, you need to have these things, like collider meshes and things like that. Yeah. LL is pointing out that world models in general are very interesting. Genie 3, Genie 3 is a very different type, but it's still fascinating as a world model. Genie 3 is giving you an interactive video stream. You're not actually getting a 3D asset of any kind. It's a 2D 30 frames per second video stream is the output of that model. Fascinating in itself. This is obviously a very different idea of world model, but it's valid, I think, to call these both world models. And you're right to say, LL, it's a fascinating time. Jan LeCun is leaving Meta this year to launch a startup to work on his world models idea. LL points out, yep, this is going to be, this is going to be a big area. This is going to be a massive part of the future of VR, is these world models from all of these different types. But there are very many different approaches to using generative AI to build a virtual world, and it's going to be something that we see in coming years as a big part of VR. I see LL pointing out something. I can't believe I didn't point it out. You can generate Nano Banana Pro images on Gemini 3 Pro and then input them into Marble. So you can, with Nano Banana Pro, describe the exact thing you want in photorealistic detail and all these precision, even text and things. And then you can take that as an input image in Marble and turn it into a 6-dot volumetric world. If anyone here has any kind of creative curiosity and loves new technology, if you haven't heard about this, I can see some people in the comments have. If you haven't heard about this, here's a fun project for the weekend, right? Go and play around with this stuff. I think you'd be shocked by what you can come up with, and especially if you have some creativity. These are advanced tools, but they are just tools, and it's still going to be the case that the people who are creative and have good ideas and good taste are going to be the ones that build the best things with these tools. But obviously, if you are someone who just says I don't want to use AI, that's valid. But I think at some level it might be, you might be missing one of the biggest revolutions in the history of creativity. And I think at the very least you want to play around with it. Maybe you say I don't like it afterwards, but play around with it. Give it a little try. Importon says Sam 3D does splats, not polygonal objects. Well, I downloaded a polygonal object from Sam 3D. I just told you it gives you the PLY, the 3D model. It definitely gave me a 3D object. So I think you're mistaken about that. It's not a Gaussian splat, Sam 3 objects. I physically have one on my computer that is a 3D model. I opened it in a 3D model viewer that does not support Gaussian splats. So I think you're mistaken about that. Okay. Yeah. So I think we're ready to move on to our final kind of usage of AI for 3D creation and reconstruction, and that is to talk about Horizon Hyperscape. It's the big launch this week. So
it kind of takes some of the ideas we've been talking about and throws a lot of compute at it and a lot of input images. If you're not familiar with it, this is something that at Connect they launched as a solo feature, so you could do solo scans. How it works is, and the scanning process is still the same, in your quest, you spend 5 or 10 minutes walking around the scene. It starts by creating a 3D mesh the same way you would for mixed reality setup, with a mesh of your environment. The next step is that you have to go around and bring your head close to all areas of the mesh and watch it disappear. So it's a little mini game of make the blue mesh around your house disappear by getting close to it. Okay? It takes about 5 to 10 minutes in total. And then after that, it gets uploaded to Meta servers. It takes about 4 to 8 to 10 hours, that kind of time frame. And then you get a notification on the mobile app on your phone that the scan is complete. And so at Meta Connect, the initial launch of this system for consumer capture, the result was very, very high quality, but it was cloud rendered and solo only. So you needed a very strong and stable internet connection at all time to use it. You could not invite other people. It was a solo experience. And if you haven't got the update rolled out to you yet, that's still what it is to you. I've got an image here actually that probably shows you the kind of the mesh you're used to for mixed reality, but as you get close to it, it's kind of the opposite from when you're setting up a mixed reality room in Quest 3. It's once you have the mesh, you're not adding more of it, you're taking it away by going close. And what's happening there under the hood is that it's just taking pictures, right? It's using it as a reference to take a lot of pictures. And then those pictures all get uploaded to meta servers. It's the same kind of thing as Marble, but you're doing it with a shit ton of views, dozens or hundreds of input images. I think it's hundreds. I'm pretty sure it's hundreds. And then these are posed views because you have a positional tracking system. You know the position and orientation of each view, and it all gets put into this giant Gaussian splat. Millions and millions of colored blobs in 3D space that are with this very clever algorithm to find unique perspectives of it. So if you missed it, the news late on Thursday, it was actually in the middle of our show, they published the news and then started rolling it out, is that they have now overhauled the system. It is now rendered on device on Quest 3 and 3S, and you can invite people to them and share them as a link. What's actually happening here is that they become, when you share them, a special kind of Horizon world. You will find that when you're in these, the app that says it is open in your Quest is Horizon Worlds. And they're Hyperscape worlds, special kinds of Horizon worlds that you can invite anyone that's on Horizon Worlds. So they also run on mobile. You can invite people on their phone. That is still cloud rendered, but it's of this lower quality scan. One thing that's important to note is that any of your scans from the old system are incompatible. You can still view them, but only locally, and they'll still be cloud rendered. You have to do a new scan after your headset gets this update, the social update. So the trade-off here is that these on-device worlds are lower quality. They're not full photorealism. They're pretty damn real. I'll talk about that in a second. But they're rendered at a lower resolution. So you'll see aliasing and pixelation, and you lose a little bit of detail. But it's actually remarkably close in the detail. It's just the biggest hit, I think, is in many ways the resolution. Well, no, it's not remarkably close. There is a noticeable downgrade, but it's running on device, and you can have people join you. So as soon as UploadVR's Kyle Riesenbach, my boss, our operations manager, got this update, he scanned his home. You can see it in this image here. There's a video on uploadvr.com that we put up just as I went live today, where I visited Kyle's home, a place that I have never been. I have met Kyle in real life, obviously, on multiple occasions. I even visited his hometown, and we went for dinner at a nice restaurant. And he kind of showed me around some parts of his home state, which is fun. But I never went to his home. I never actually visited his home. But now I have, virtually, appearing as a meta avatar. Truly a bizarre, in a good way, experience. A science fiction-esque experience in many ways. And I'm really not overhyping it. When you try it,
there is this feeling that someone has invited you into their home across a continent. Now, of course, today you're appearing here as meta avatars, and you can see the kind of stark, jarring gap between the quality of the environment and the avatar. But we're not that many years away, folks, from this being codec avatars. You know, I don't think we're that many years away. Uh, Probably one or two away from, shoulder up codec avatars, and maybe 3 to 5 for full body avatars, and if codec avatars. And at that point, this becomes essentially a teleportation technology, and already is in many ways. Right? Again, there is this strong sense that I have been invited in to Kyle's home, and you can watch the video, and please do. It's on our YouTube channel, where Kyle guides me through this area that he scanned. It's this whole kind of downstairs area of his family home with, his dining table here, and, family photos on the wall, his kitchen, his living room. And we keep noting that it's lower quality than the solo scans, and we want to get that out of the way. It's absolutely true, but it's still a very, very high quality scan. And so right after this visit was finished, I went and scanned my own the kitchen and living room area of the apartment I live in. And I want to bring you an anecdote here of what happened to me. So I then obviously got the notification 5 or so hours later that the scan was finished. I then was in my office with my headset on, and I load up into this kitchen and living room area, right, which is obviously far away down the hall. Immediately, because of what I had been doing earlier for recording something, I had to turn my Guardian sensitivity all the way to the lowest, just because I was trying to get something at the edge of the Guardian for like a screenshot or a video. I can't remember the details, but it was for UploadVR, obviously. And my Guardian sensitivity was at the very lowest, so I would see it at the last moment. So immediately I load into this virtual version of my kitchen, and something happened where I was completely convinced on one part of my brain was so convinced that I was now in the kitchen that I just walked forward, and I walked straight into the wall of my office. And I have been in virtual reality for over a decade now. I thought I was long, long, long past the days where I would ever do that, where I would ever walk in to my physical wall because I thought that I could walk through VR. We've all been there when we first go into VR. If you haven't, then you haven't experienced true presence yet. But we've all done something like that, right? We've leaned on a virtual table and fallen straight through because it's not real. Or, at some point someone's like thrown a virtual object at us that we're so convinced is real, an enemy or something, that you actually gasp and duck for a second. All done that for me years and years ago. I kind of desensitized it in a sense. But for this my brain was so used to being indoors and being in the same indoor environment, but in a different room, that I could not convince, even though this is a lower quality scan, even though I could see, some Gaussian splat artifacts, a part of my brain was just convinced that I was really in the kitchen. And I went to walk towards the kitchen counter with my full conscious awareness that I'm not. And no part of my brain would properly acknowledge that I was 100% aware that there was a real physical wall in front of me. So that's something that I think is remarkable, and an embarrassing anecdote to bring you, I guess, but it's an important one because it's something that happened, and it's something that matters. That these environments, even with the quality drop from the cloud rendered ones, are truly so detailed and so realistic that at some level it does feel like being in another place. It does feel like that because the scale is correct. There's subtle lighting changes that are kind of encapsulated in things like shiny surfaces. And I just wanted to bring that an embarrassing anecdote because that was truly one of those things that I did not think was something that I would ever do in VR again, because I'm so desensitized. I spent thousands of hours in a headset. Yeah. I think LL is right in saying that it's because I've seen this space so much in pass-through. I spent a lot of time in my kitchen in pass-through for testing various headsets and whatever, and just maybe I just have the headset on and go to grab something. That is the case. It actually is the case that I think you're absolutely correct, LL, in your comment of saying I've been in this headset in pass through in my kitchen so often that my brain made the connection. I actually don't, to be clear, it did not happen this is why I want to bring this up. It didn't happen when I was in Kyle's. At no point did I walk into my physical wall while I was at Kyle's home. Not because Kyle's is any less realistic of a scan than mine. I'm still using the same on-device system, to be crystal clear here. It's just that because my brain was so used to to being in pass-through. You're absolutely right, Ella. That is the actual answer. That my brain said, you're in pass-through in your kitchen now. Because pass-through is a lower detail representation of the physical world in a different way, right? It's kind of resolving full detail through a low resolution and grainy camera, whereas this is the opposite. You're getting like a sharper image, right? The screen of Quest 3 is higher resolution than the pass-through cameras. So you're getting a sharper view, but of a grainier kind of base reality. So yeah. I see some people sharing their anecdotes of putting their Vive wand on a table tennis table that wasn't there and heard the crash that hits the floor. I see Dutch Tiger saying they haven't done it personally, but they've punched their furniture. Sampler is saying that it tricked their subconscious as well, that there was just as confused. Yeah. I see Davin saying that they happened to them. They almost put their controllers on a chair in the scan and then realized that they were sitting on the chair that I saw. There truly is something that I don't think any human being has ever experienced before happening here with our perceptual system, folks. This is screwing with our brains in ways that are only supposed to happen in dreams. That is a great example, I think. Yeah, like there was also another point where I went, because I obviously wanted to play with this and see could I break my brain even more, because of course I do. I want to tell you all about it if I can make myself, lose my mind for this. But I went to a different part of the kitchen and then stood virtually in the other part. And that was, I honestly, I think it's like you're borderline at like psychedelic experience here where you start to walk forward and your brain tries to really go, what the F is happening right now? Oh, am I, in this part of the kitchen, but I'm in the kitchen, but I'm in this perspective. So I'm walking here, even though I should be over here. And yeah, there was a point where I started to like think about putting the controller down in the exact same way, this controller thing. And I don't think I'm stupid, but I could not figure out in my head where I could and couldn't put this controller down at this moment, because my subconscious kept telling me, the kitchen table's right there, put it down. What are you talking about? It's right there. I see it right there. Put the damn controller down. And my conscious is going, no, it's not. That's not a real thing. That's over there. I need to do it on this side. But then I couldn't drop it there because even though I know my kitchen, I know where this is. Yeah. I see Hair Force saying that they did something very similar. LL saying, yeah. Okay, I see a few people saying that they've done their scan, but they don't see the option. Unfortunately, this is another feature that Meta is slowly rolling out. I wish I could tell you that there's a magic way to get it. There isn't. One day your headset is going to get it, and unfortunately, there's no really good way to tell. That sucks, but it is what it is. By the way, I've kind of buried another lead here. You can probably tell I'm a bit frazzled from trying to do a bunch of things at once before the show. We put the link to this in our article. You can go and visit Kyle's home yourself by clicking the link on uploadvr.com. Kyle has graciously accepted to be the public tester for UploadVR. He has by far got the most presentable home. Absolutely the most presentable home. My small near London apartment that very very struggled with. I struggled deeply with having enough space to exist. Is not going to be presentable. Same thing with Ian's New York apartment. I'm not. Maybe it is presentable. I'm just assuming. I don't think Ian was available for this anyway. But I think Kyle was probably the most appropriate home for this. I see someone saying, I don't need Kyle virtually flexing on me with a super tidy house. I see Andrew Tech asking, will Kyle be there? So that's a great question, and it brings us on to an important technical point to bring up. This supports up to 8 people per instance. So if Kyle is there when you join and there are less than 7 people with him, you will be there with Kyle. And then, just like in any MMORPG or whatever game that does this instancing, once it hits 8, the server creates a new instance, and the next 8 people get in it, and so on and so on. Meta says that it hopes to improve that number and get it beyond 8 in 2026 at some point. We will see if that happens. They're not making any promises. They're saying they hope to. I should also point that this only works on Quest 3 and 3S for headsets. You cannot use this on Quest 2. You can join on your phone. You can run around Kyle's house on your phone, but that's not the same. Do it in a headset, people, please. Yeah. I see so many people. I'm really glad to see so many people in the comments pointing out that they also almost ran into their wall and kind of that they've had the same experience. I'm glad I'm not, uh, I don't know what the word is here. Obviously, it's an embarrassing story to bring up, but I'm glad I'm not the only one. It's great to see that we're all losing our minds by this feature. It really it blurs the line between VR and mixed reality. That's what I think this does, and I think Ian would love to be here for this conversation, and we'll have some further talk with him next week, I'm sure. But it blurs the line between what is VR and what is mixed reality. Now, of course, this is VR. You're in a fully VR. The pass-through cameras when you're in this room, there's no pass-through. The pass-through cameras could be sliced off and thrown away. You could literally rip them out of the headset, and this part will work. The scan won't work, obviously, but this part will work. You can join Kyle's home without pass-through cameras. But obviously, Kyle's home was made with the pass-through cameras. So it's like, is this VR? Is it mixed reality? Maybe it's VR. It is VR, but it doesn't feel like VR when I'm in my kitchen and I'm on the other side of my kitchen. So yeah, it's it's pretty crazy. I see LL saying that it's disappointing that this won't be possible on Steam Frame. Yeah, that's something that, I mean, look, you can use your phone to run an open source model on your PC and or on the cloud, and I'm sure there are going to be solutions for this. There are open source models that can do pretty similar to this if you want to leave your PC on and running for 3 days. uh, Maybe more depending on your GPU, right? There's probably going to be a lot of electricity usage, be warned. But yeah, fundamentally, I look. This is probably one of those things where Valve does not have a world-leading AI division. I'm not saying Meta's at number one, but they're in the top 10, right? Meta's in the top 10, and I think Valve's answer to this, I'm not going to speak for them, but I think they would probably say something along the lines of, you can do this yourself. You can add in a color camera to the Steam Frames modular PCIe MIPI port. You can run an open source model from someone else, and you can explore it in Steam Frame, right? You can then walk around this VR environment. You're going to have to, someone's going to have to build, the multiplayer infrastructure. It is interesting that this is built into Horizon OS. This is built into Horizon Worlds. These are Horizon Worlds, to be clear. They're unlisted Horizon Worlds, so you won't find them in search. But whatever your Horizon Worlds avatar is, what you'll see here. So if you have like a custom avatar you bought, like if you have Captain America or something, you'll show up here as Captain America. And this is, whatever your locomotion settings are for Horizon Worlds in terms of teleport or move, this is what you'll get here, right? You get Horizon Worlds. So I think it also is, it's very funny. Can you imagine one of those like dumb Horizon World screenshots from like 2020 where you have like the low resolution character and a like triangle colored red or something like that, or the Zuckerberg photo with the shitty Zuckerberg avatar and the Eiffel Tower behind him, and then compare it to this. This is a screenshot from Horizon Worlds. To be clear, this is literally a screenshot I took on my Quest 3 in Horizon Worlds. So that's actually very funny to see, funny to think about. Obviously, a big issue with Gaussian splats is that these are not interactive. I can't pull this chair. I can't take that cup and mug and move it around. But there's nothing theoretically stopping Meta from adding support for bringing in objects into here, right? There's nothing. Again, let's put these things together. Maybe Kyle does this scan again and takes the mug off the table, and then he goes and uses SAM 3D objects to get a 3D object of the mug, and now it becomes its thing. Maybe future models can do this automatically, right? They can. Future AI models will be able to distinguish between the furniture and objects on the furniture, and then you can do this by default. These are areas of research that I imagine Meta is exploring. Uh, as we keep talking about the rapid advancement of AI here, think of where stuff is going to be in 5 years, folks. Think of where this stuff is going to be in 5 years. It is very, very clear that the uh, advancements in generative AI, in computer vision, in Gaussian splatting are going to deliver a whole segment of VR usage that is very, very different from everything else that has come before and dramatically useful. Because, right, what's the real world use of this is a good question, actually. Is this a gimmick? Well, you could use this to do kind of virtual, what I'm looking for, walkthroughs and showcases of rooms for real estate, for construction. You could also use it for tourism. Places that you would go to today, museums could put entire kind of uh, exhibition rooms into this. I'm really surprised that that's not something that's already being explored. Meta does have some public demos you can go and view and actually launch as instances. If you join them, you'll see up to 8 people there. They have the UFC Octagon. They have Gordon Ramsay's home kitchen. They have can't even remember what the other one of them's like a cafe, one of them's like a crock shop. But you can see those in our original news article covering this. We have links to them in there. You can join them on your phone. You can join them on your Quest 3. You can invite someone there. I think also once you get to the point where a feature I'd love to see here that they don't have today is position matching. So Kyle could be in room scale, walking around his home like this. Because to be clear, what Kyle is doing here is he's pushing a thumbstick to move around. He's not actually physically standing here in his home. He is, this is the big caveat, just to be clear, if you weren't aware of this, he is pushing a thumbstick to move around a virtual version of his home. But theoretically, in the same way that the system knows where your guardian boundaries are, and the same way it can do spatial anchors, theoretically, there's nothing stopping Meta from doing a house scale tracking system, not tracking system, house scale anchoring, where it aligns the scan to where it was. Now, massive safety issues exist there that may prevent this from shipping. For example, if someone had now moved this chair to here, you're going to walk straight into it. That's a huge issue. You would have to use this under the assumption that nothing has changed. That's the big issue. Where I think this might be going in 5 to 10 years, that kind of time frame where we're talking about not just the near term stuff, but where do we go from here on a long term perspective, is that you can get a dynamically updating Gaussian splat or some future 3D reconstruction tech that is able to take a base scan like this. And if you have moved the chair, within a few seconds, the chair fades out of here. It literally like just fizzles out of existence and re-fizzles into existence where it was. That's where I think we're going. If you look at the progress here and the pace and some of the research going on here and some of the fundamental ideas. In the longer term, do you even need a base scan at all? On the 10 to 15 year time scale, can you, by just panning your head around very quickly, have something that is generated in seconds and dynamically updated so that you don't even need to see it at all? You just see pass through, but the person coming into your home sees this dynamically 3D generated version of your home. There are things being done in reconstruction today, 3D reconstruction, that were science fiction pie in the sky decades out 5 years ago. Things that Meta has shown this idea at Connect like 5 years ago. And I remember a lot of the people watching, and myself included, thought this is just more of that pie in the sky research. This isn't going to ship. And, anytime soon. And now this is shipping on a mobile chipset. And I want to be clear, like the resolution here is a bit rough. You can see Kyle's not exactly at his full definition self here, right? There's like the resolution here is not amazing, but we expect an XR2 Gen 3 next year. And the pace here is just going to keep going. I'm genuinely shocked that they got this running on a mobile chipset at this quality while having a 3D avatar and locomotion and spatial audio and it's not like you're just running the entire chip on just the rendering. This is an interactive experience, and you're doing everything else as well, right? So yeah, this is the future is very bright here. I think there is a very bright future in 3D reconstruction, and that's kind of been the trend of this show. So please go and watch the video where I went to visit Kyle's home. We have perspectives from each of us. We were both recording and we cut between them, so you can see, a toggled perspective um, between our views. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone who is celebrating that. Just you Americans, I think, are the only people who celebrate Thanksgiving. Correct me if I'm wrong. It being an American event, obviously. And so, yes, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Really, really great conversation, discussion. I appreciate that everyone's been really, really respectful of everyone. I see Davin Bigelow trying to organize an 8-person fight in the UFC octagon. Yeah, go for it. You could do that right now. You can go and start punching at each other. That'd be quite funny. Meet me in the octagon. You can see the metaverse vision coming together, by the way. This is the last thing I'm going to point out here. You can see, we can all shit on the metaverse all day, and there's a lot of stuff to validly criticize, but you can see the vision starting to come together. You can see that if you're playing this on a decades scale strategy, some of the things that people laughed at a few years ago become a little less funny now and a little bit more, potential. And you can see that when that meta avatar turns into a Kodak avatar, full body 3 to 5 years from now, this starts to look a lot less like a, you know, thing to laugh at and more of a thing to marvel at. But we'll get to that when we get to that. And we'll see what happens. Thanks so much, everyone. Really enjoyed the conversation with you today. Really enjoyed you being here, and happy Thanksgiving. We will see you in the future.